Now, the setup for this is that, we know about campaign finance, right? We know that it's a disaster. We know that dark money is an absolute disaster. But what I didn't realize until I listened to this podcast is exactly how we got here. And the reason why I think it's important is because and by the way, when I say these things, it's because I've gone through them myself. And also, I don't know that I'm 100% correct here, right? But I do know that a lot of the things that I have seen and understood as being like these buzzwords, yeah, edit the flash goal. The flash goal I want to edit down, don't I? I don't even know anymore. Let's see here. Let's just do 150 for now. No, not 15. 150. And that'll be my goal, the live goal. Okay. So when we hear things like, oh, wait, where's the, let's make sure that it's good to go. Oh, there's still more. No, that's not good. That's not good. View my channel. No, that's not good. That's not good. It is still stretched. Okay, so I think that means that the base resolution needs. So we'll see if it works this time. Okay, so when we hear things like Citizens United, when we hear things like about campaign finance reform, oh, okay, see, now it's a little bit better, but it's, it's kind of small. Oh, no. That's it. That's exactly what I want. Great. Low, it should be good now. It should be good. All right, I'm going to move over here a little bit. Whoop. Launching new private health tracking system. Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay, so we know about Citizens United, but we don't know why, how exactly. It's in my mouth. Exactly. Jeez. Like I'm freaking 80. We don't know how exactly we got there, right? Hey, Spirit, how are you? Great to see you here. And I think that this has a lot of reach, and I think it's really important that we start to understand not only how this court was assembled, but also, and just a reminder, keep liking and sharing whenever you can. I'm not very good at self-promoting, but I'm going to start because I have to tell you, I've put in so much work for a long time, the last like 8 years, and what I've come to realize is like what's key for us moving forward is getting very specific on the legal gymnastics that were used to get this court assembled and to understand a lot of the legalese that was involved in getting us to this place. Hey, Jeremiah. So thank you all for being here. Hopefully we can get the numbers up a little bit. But hey, as I've said many months ago, if I'm talking to two people, I don't care as long as you do some learning and everybody gives a shit about wanting to grow. And that's what it's about. So you got to start somewhere. Okay, good. Charging up the phone, but no comments. Right. Yes. Okay, you don't have to yell. Okay, good. Autoplay, settings, comments, edit video, maybe? No, it is not made for kids. Good God. Subtitles. No, it's definitely not made for kids, folks. Okay, so let's save that. And then, other comments now. Automatic chapters, concepts, language certification, there's a category. Comments on. Yes, they should be. Lowo, talk to me. What do you got for me? Okay, anyway. So, for example, like with Roe v. Wade, right? Everybody's most of us free-thinking, normal human beings, who are, who actually care about women's bodily autonomy. Of course, we didn't want Roe overturned. But the problem is that Roe was on, unfortunately, even before it was overturned, it was on very shaky legal ground. Now, why? It's not the fault of those who are trying to protect AB rights, right? No, because you're working against legal actors, legal players, right, who are bringing their own legal framework to fight whatever framework, right, you're bringing in order to make it more convincing. So they based it on this right to privacy, but one of the reasons why they started to immediately try to dismantle it, well, first of all, because they don't believe in it because they're crazy, but it's largely because, oh, and by the way, I know my mic is set up for this too, Lowo, so the sound wasn't so great either. It's probably much better right now, right? They went after it right away because they knew that they could dismantle it legally. And so understanding a lot of the process behind how we got here, I think is super important. All right, I'm going to shut up now because I'm going to let Sirota do the work. And by the way, if you are a Gen Xer or just below or just above, you're going to love this too because he uses a lot of movie references. He's a Gen Xer himself. And yeah, it's really cool. All right, here we go.
They're spending a record $880 million in the midterm spending.
By the way, I don't want to focus us on Roe or other things. I was just using that as a loose example for the moment, okay? So anyway, like and share, tap and share. Here we go.
Projected to reach, get this, nearly $11 billion.
Judy, we are seeing a storm of campaign spending.
An ultra-secretive Chicago industrial mogul has quietly given $1.6 billion to the architect of the right-wing takeover of the courts.
This kind of
So this is Master Plan. This is the podcast. It's David Sirota. He presented it with his company, The Lever. And this is episode 1, and it's called Milk Money.
Assuming corruption does not occur naturally. It's not inevitable. It is created by people who want to trap us inside a system of bribery, graft, and dishonesty because that serves them.
Now, I also want to make this clear. One of the things that I'm trying to preach, I guess, is not knowing, right? Just going in with a not knowing mind. And I'll give you an example. I happen to think, based on multiple articles that I've read, pieces that I've read, things I've listened to, right? I am convinced that there was meddling in our election in 2016. Now, I trust Glenn Greenwald. Not all the time, but I'm just using it as an example because Glenn Greenwald did a piece the other day where he was like, it's all bullshit. It was all made up. And you have to be accountable if you're on the left and all this stuff. Now, I'm not necessarily buying into that, but I'm going to listen to what he has to say. And I'm going to try to set aside, right, my thoughts about it, even though I'm operating on a pretty solid set of data. Part of that data is the fact that Robert Mueller said in his report that there was wrongdoing. They just couldn't find any evidence of it. So in this case, just like with the National Popular Vote Compact, I invite you to keep your mind open. Come into this with a, I don't know anything, even though I know you do, right? I know you do. But when I listen to this, I really, oh, you sent me a comment. Okay, let's see here. So annoying. Right, I went into this with a not knowing mind, and I have to tell you, it was like tremendously helpful, okay? I don't know why this is, yeah, I'm just going to go back to the beginning of this. But anyway. All right. Lowell, I'll get to you in a second. Yeah, I don't know why I just want to get to the, Restream. Why isn't Restream open here? Oh, because it's open over here. I am really getting the hang of this. I just have to, boom, there we go. Now the live should come up here. And I can't see my comment. Oh, yeah. Hey, there we go. Gotcha. Sweet. Yay. Okay, good. Oh, yeah. Hey, so I'm on YouTube. Of course, I have to mute now because that's, I'm going to be able to hear myself. So go into this. Yeah, go on. It's all good. It's all good. It's my fault. It's my ADHD, right? Come into this with an open mind. And please, please stay on this journey with me. Even when you think like, oh, okay, I get it. No, you don't get it. I mean, you do, but you don't. We don't. And that's why I had to listen to this like 2 or 3 times. Also, one one resource for this, right? But it's not an entire resource, but is a big resource is The Scheme by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. How the right wing used dark money to capture the Supreme Court. And this is a very seminal work. I think everybody should be looking at that as well. Okay, let's get back to master plan. Here we go. I'm going to jump back just a couple of minutes here.
Record $880 million in the midterms.
Spending projected to reach, get this, nearly $11 billion.
Judy, we are seeing a storm of campaign spending.
An ultra-secretive Chicago industrial mogul has quietly given $1.6 billion to the architect of the right-wing takeover of the courts.
This kind of all-consuming corruption does not occur naturally. It's not inevitable. It is created by people who want to trap us inside a system of bribery, graft, and dishonesty because that serves them.
Yes, it does.
So
Flash
who
goal,
exactly
by the way. Flash goal,
designed
folks.
this dystopia we're now immersed in? The Levers team of investigative journalists has spent the last 2 years digging into archives and lost audio, searching for that answer, and we've finally found it. I'm David Sirota, and this is Master Plan.
Matthew Broderick. Very catchy tune. I've earned everything I've got.
In this first episode, we'll eventually go back 50 years to start exposing the epic story of how corruption was legalized in America. But first, let me tell you where this story started for me. Can you pinpoint the exact moment when you realized how corrupt and foobar everything was? I can. It was after a pre-dawn bus trip to Canada.
Sarah Conji joins us live now from the U.S.-Canadian border in Highgate with more on the story. Sarah?
Roger, it's a matter of consumers paying one price here in the U.S. and a different price just 40 feet from where I'm standing.
It was the year 2000.
One more
I was
rose
a few
on the
years
flash
out
drive.
of college,
Flash
following
goal.
my dreams of good government and progress that I'd seen on the West Wing. I scored my first big job in politics working for a then-obscure New England congressman who'd started
Hey, Wakandan.
busing seniors to Canada in search of lower-priced prescription drugs.
So then the question comes, why is it that the same exact prescription drug manufactured in the United States of America is sold here in Canada or in Mexico or in Europe at far, far lower prices than that product is sold in the United States? That is insane.
He was right. It is insane.
Insane.
And he had a plan to fix it. A bill that would allow American pharmacies to buy cheaper drugs from Canada and sell them to Americans at the lower world market prices. It was a common sense idea that seemed popular in both parties. Some Democrats even started campaigning on the issue in the 2000 election. I worked for one of them
Great to
in
see ya.
Montana, a farmer running for Senate who was organizing similar bus trips to Canada.
We didn't ask people when they got on those buses for Canada if they were Republicans or Democrats or libertarians or vegetarians. We only asked them if you would like to make a difference.
Yes.
We said that we would embarrass Congress into action. And over a year ago when we started these trips, Congress had never heard about the problem about prescription drugs. Now everybody's got a solution.
The pressure campaign worked. More lawmakers from both parties sponsored the bill. It got votes in the House and Senate. It passed Congress, and President Bill Clinton signed it. To 25-year-old me, it seemed the system had worked. There was a problem, the public pressured its government, the legislative machine went to work, and the wrong was righted. But then the hammer came down.
A congressional plan to reduce Americans' medical costs today ran smack into a roadblock.
I remember hearing the news. I was in my tiny D.C. apartment.
Secretary of Health Donna Shalala, in a letter to the president, has now scuttled the plan by citing serious flaws and loopholes which undermine the potential for cost savings.
The trickery was grotesque. Lawmakers issued their press releases touting the passage of a bill that promised to lower the cost of prescription drugs, but the pharmaceutical industry had been funneling millions of dollars to both political parties, and lobbyists got their allies in Congress to slip a loophole into the bill. Then the Clinton administration used that loophole to kill the program before it could ever go into effect.
Since she couldn't certify that American consumers wouldn't get lower prices, she didn't want to hold out false hope and be involved in something she thought was not legitimate.
The Clinton White House made this announcement right after Christmas.
Okay, did you all follow that? I can replay it if you want, okay? Just be honest. Put a 1 in there if you want me to replay it. I will replay it, not a problem. Edith, we're listening to this podcast, Master Plan. This is a podcast. Okay, so this is very important, okay? So this is how this works a lot of the time. And by the way, this dovetails, not to pander to anybody here, but this dovetails very well with a lot of things that Danny's been talking about in her live, okay? And a lot of people have. And I've been talking about this nonstop in that, you know, we see that an initiative is being taken, but we don't understand during the process the kinds of loopholes that are put in there so that by the time it hits, say, Bill Clinton's desk or Barack Obama's desk or George Bush's desk or Donald Trump's desk, right? It's not quite what it seems, and there's reasons why certain other things are happening. Okay, so here we go. 1 second. I'm replaying.
Bill Clinton signed it.
Okay, hold on.
States of America is sold here in Canada or in Mexico.
So it's all about prescription drug prices, right? And Bernie Sanders, that was from a long time ago, and so that's Bernie Sanders talking about the difference in pricing for drugs in the United States and in Canada.
Or in Europe at far lower prices than that product is sold in the United States. That is insane.
He was right. It is insane. And he had a plan to fix it. A bill that would allow American pharmacies to buy cheaper drugs from Canada and sell them to Americans at the lower world market prices.
Right? Lower the drug prices, right? Let us buy from Canada. That will lower all the prices. This was the proposal.
It was a common sense idea that seemed popular in both parties.
Makes sense.
Some Democrats even started campaigning on the issue in the 2000 election. I worked for one of them in Montana, a farmer running for Senate who was organizing similar bus trips to Canada.
We didn't ask people when they got on those buses for Canada if they were Republicans or Democrats or libertarians or vegetarians. We only asked them if you would like to make a difference. We said that we would embarrass Congress into action. And over a year ago when we started these trips, Congress had never heard about the problem about prescription drugs. Now everybody's got a solution.
The pressure campaign worked. More lawmakers from both parties sponsored the bill. It got votes in the House and Senate. It passed Congress, and President Bill Clinton signed it. To 25-year-old me, it seemed this.
Okay, so you get it? They offered the bill, Democratic Congress passed it, and they sent it up to Clinton to sign. So he's saying, I'm 25 years old, I work in public policy, this is great. Seems like the system is working, right? Not so fast.
System had worked. There was a problem, the public pressured its government, the legislative machine went to work, and the wrong was righted. But then the hammer came down.
A congressional plan to reduce Americans' medical costs today ran smack into a roadblock.
I remember hearing the news. I was in my tiny D.C. apartment.
Secretary of Health Donna Shalala, in a letter to the president, has now scuttled the plan by citing serious flaws and loopholes which undermine the potential for cost savings.
The trickery was grotesque. Lawmakers issued their press releases touting the passage of a bill that promised to lower the cost of prescription drugs, but the pharmaceutical industry had been funneling millions of dollars to both political parties, and lobbyists got their allies in Congress to slip a loophole into the bill. Then the Clinton administration used that loophole to kill the program before it could ever go into effect.
Okay, understood? They got the loophole in, so even though this Democratic Congress, even though it was a bill that Clinton says he wanted to sign, right, they got the loophole in, all of a sudden it gets to his desk, Shalala walks in and goes, we got a problem here. This is actually not going to help. And by the way, does this sound familiar with what likely happened? See, again, on the surface, we look at, say, the crime bill in 1994, right? And we say, well, why did members of the Congressional Black Caucus, why did they say yes to this? Well, it's not that simple, right? Remember, there's a process. This goes into markup in subcommittee and then committees. And I don't even know as much about that as other people do, but I do know this, right? These bills get marked up. That means there's changes being made all the time, right? They're wheeling and dealing. Well, take this phrase out, take this clause out, leave this loophole in for us, and we'll vote for it. So that is exactly what happened with the crime bill. Were members of the Congressional Black Caucus, for example, and again, we're not getting on this whole thing now, but I'm just as an example, tell me if this is helpful, maybe it's not, maybe I'm over talking, but it was partly a case of the community leaders saying, yes, we do need some measures to help curb crime. The problem is what ended up in the crime bill and what police departments could exploit were very likely some of the problem was that there were loopholes that they could exploit to then use tactics and techniques like stop and frisk, for example, right? Other loopholes that led to mass incarceration, certain penalties, right, for certain drugs, for certain crimes, yeah? So when they are being basically blackmailed into, having to leave in or not push for certain clauses, certain phrases, certain reinforcing policies in that bill, right? That's a surefire sign that the other side is working to exploit whatever loophole they can find. And it's also very likely, by the way, that the person who offered that bill, who is now making that compromise, knows that that's a loophole. But there's nothing they can do in that situation when the YT supremacist who has power over them and I'm not painting the left as necessarily the good guys and the right as the bad guys, right? And as you're going to see here, they're all part of this system, but this is primarily a conservative movement. And I think when Danny, for example, was talking this morning about how you can say that they're birds of a feather and that they're the same, they're all the same. They're not. They're not. It doesn't mean that we are deifying Democrats, and I don't even really talk about political parties that often. It's not that we are excusing the Democratic Party or the left. But, hey, Jamie, good to see you. Thanks for popping in. But we are saying that primarily the resistance to change comes from the right. The initiative to literally set up the very systems that denied many of the rights that, say, black people have been talking about for, I don't know, at least the 280 years we've been around, plus another, 160 before that, right? Are things that should be just kind of natural. I mean, it should be intuitive. It should be logical. It should be rational, but it's not in this kind of system that we have. Anyway, I digress. Here we go.
Since she couldn't certify that American consumers wouldn't get lower prices, she didn't want to hold out false hope and be involved in something she thought was not legitimate.
The Clinton White House made this announcement right after Christmas, when everyone was on break.
Of course they did.
The kind of timing often used in Washington to make sure nobody notices something bad is happening. Mm-hmm. The whole thing reeked of corruption. And today, the price of medicine continues to skyrocket.
Yes, it does.
Last January, prices of more than 800 medications went up. It hurts those without insurance and even those with it.
My innocence was gone. After a few more years on Capitol Hill, I left Washington, D.C., bitter, bruised, and disgusted. I felt like Rowdy Roddy Piper in that old cult movie, They Live, when he found sunglasses that let him see all the monsters destroying society.
All right, put a 1 in the chat if you've seen the movie John Carpenter's They Live. Because I hadn't for a long time, and then like several years ago, somebody's like, "You've never seen They Live with Rowdy Roddy Piper and Keith David?" By the way, Keith David, who just got, there was a great video, a viral video of him being at home and finding out that he got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So that's going to be coming up soon. All right, tap and share, like and share. Let's get some more people up here. I just had double the number of people in here. What did I do? Did I start getting boring? I started getting boring. Hi. Spirit, you saw that? It was cool, right? Okay.
I wanted some justice, which was the perfect attitude for becoming an investigative journalist.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Oh. It's a famous line.
I started firing out stories that exposed politicians who were taking money from healthcare giants, Wall Street banks, and defense contractors. I wrote a few best-selling books, hosted a radio show, and launched the investigative news site The Lever. I even helped come up with the story for the Oscar-nominated movie called Don't Look Up, which featured a corrupt White House letting its top donor try to profit off a comet that was hurtling towards Earth.
Mm-hmm. This comet actually contains almost $140 trillion worth of assets.
Buck 40 trillion. Yeah. What do these trillions of dollars even matter if we're all going to die?
Oh, no! What if we're rich and we're safe?
I'm proud of what I've accomplished in my reporting on corruption, but over the years, I also started to understand that each instance of corruption was a symptom of a whole system created by a master plan to legalize corruption in all of its forms, from buying elections to bribing public officials with gifts and campaign cash.
Yep.
Over the next 10 episodes, we're going to expose the blueprint that created this system, and we'll expose it by doing the thing that journalism used to do all the time.
Show me the money.
Show me the money! Show me the money!
No, not that. This.
Follow the money. What do you mean? Just follow the money.
Why follow the money? Why expose this man?
Anybody know what that's from? Follow the money. What line that's from? Anybody know what movie? You get a bonus star right now, just an emotional jabber star if you know what movie that's from. Follow the money. Abby, you were supposed to message me, my dear. Hello, Abby Voss. Hello, old friend. All right, anyway, that is from All the King's Men. That is Deep Throat, who we now know was, I forgot his name, but the higher up at the FBI. All right, here we go.
Master plan? Because your life is worse than it should be, thanks to the corruption of American democracy.
He's right.
Trouble earning enough to pay your credit card bill and your rent? You can thank the corporate donors who delivered cash to lawmakers who then blocked a minimum wage increase, blocked rent control, and blocked a cap on credit card interest rates.
Yep.
Are you one of the 112 million Americans who struggle to pay for health care? You can thank the health insurance companies who funneled millions of dollars to lawmakers to make sure they keep America as the only industrialized country without government-guaranteed medical care.
Yes.
Sweating climate change? Look no further than the mountains of money that fossil fuel companies give to lawmakers to let those companies continue incinerating the atmosphere.
No.
I think back 2 decades ago to those bus trips up to Canada and all those seniors trying to get the medicines they needed to stay alive. Those seniors were victims of a system of corruption that's been legalized over decades. Now, you may be wondering, if corruption is so bad, why would anyone want to legalize it? Because the oligarchs, operatives, and opportunists who are executing the master plan don't like democracy. They want minority rule for themselves. And they understand that in a properly functioning one-person, one-vote democracy, they would never be able to gain control of the political system and then enact the self-enriching and ideologically extreme policies they want. They understand that to get their way, they must be allowed to buy elections, legislation, court rulings, and public policy. This master plan started about a half-century ago, so that's where we're going next. After the break, we're taking you back to the year 1971, just before this master plan was hatched. It was a time when we almost got this problem of corruption under control.
Almost.
It was an era when hope and progress flowed like milk. The year is 1970.
Okay. So 1971 is key, and I want you to keep these few things in mind, these few things that are floating, okay? Keep in mind now, you got to take yourself back, and not the ugly clothes and the bell bottoms and all that shit, all right? But 1965, this is only 6 years removed from the Civil Rights Act. It is also only 3 years removed from the FHA, right? The Fair Housing Act, and the establishment of the Fair Housing Administration, led by the way, which created HUD, right? And the first head of HUD was George Romney, Mitt Romney's father, who's actually quite liberal, all things considered, back in the day. Unfortunately, he was met with, he had his typical YT supremacist views, very patriarchal, very kind of condescending. But he ran into a whole lot of issues. In fact, you can read a lot about that experience in Race for Profit, Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor. Those of you who know me, it's only a few of you, but I'd like to kind of jump around a little bit and talk about books, but we are going to stay focused on this podcast. So anyway, it's 3 years after the Fair Housing Act. Keep in mind, too, that in 1967-68, starting with Watts in 1965 here in LA, you had a, thank you. Oh God, see what happens when I look down and I forgot. The cities, right? The cities were starting to, kind of fall apart. Why? Because of white flight. All of the YT people were leaving the cities because the Fair Housing Act was like, okay, enough is enough. Like we said back in 1948, there needed to be no redlining, but we're still doing it. And so now it's like the court is really saying, okay, no, you need to do this. You need to desegregate your schools. Remember, the South didn't desegregate any of their schools, and the North had issues too, obviously. They're not off the hook. I mean, the most segregated cities in America, my friends, are in the North, and they pretty much always have been. We look at this as just a Southern issue, but it is absolutely not. Chicago, New York, Boston, some of the most segregated cities in America. And with the decision of San Antonio Independent School District v. Texas in 1971, any kind of guarantee of equal educational funding, right, for public schools went right out the window. And you can look up that case on your own. San Antonio Independent School District v. Texas, and then 3 years later, Milliken v. Bradley, which basically undermined a lot of Brown v. Board of Education because it was all about the busing and Detroit, and you can read about that in a book called The Containment by Michelle Adams. All right, back to master plan.
Hot pants were hot, bell bottoms were swinging.
1971.
And peasant tops were all the rage. Progress is in the air. There are thousands of protesters descending on Washington to demand the end of the Vietnam War. The Lorax is a brand new bestseller. And disco is just starting to emerge on the music scene.
Disco!
Even stuffy old Washington, D.C. felt like a place where things were possible. In less than a decade, public pressure had compelled lawmakers to create Medicare, Medicaid, civil rights legislation, voting rights legislation, and the Housing and Urban Development Department. The United States government had officially declared war on poverty. A Republican president had signed legislation creating the Environmental Protection Agency.
The new super agency to pull together all the federal efforts now underway and to come up with some new ones.
President Richard Nixon had also signed the Clean Air Act and pledged to end the Vietnam War. Congress was working on all sorts of other groundbreaking bills, too. Initiatives to improve standards in industries from energy to agriculture to nursing homes to consumer products. They extended the Voting Rights Act for another 5 years. This whirlwind of legislation marked an era driven by the notion that government could fix the nation's greatest problems and be a partner in protecting consumers.
Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, I also want to remind people, and he's kind of glorifying it a little bit here. Nixon was a piece of shit. We know that. We know that he did not end the Vietnam War. We also know that Nixon, now we know, and you can find out more about this in Elizabeth Hinton's From the War on Poverty to the War on Crime, The Making of Mass Incarceration in America, where Nixon took a lot of the Great Society programs that were federal money and he turned them into block grants for the states. And with a wink and a nod was like, you can basically do whatever you want, but please spend it on policing. So that's another thing to consider. And a good reason why the cities were falling apart at this point. As far as the Clean Air Act, I don't know. I guess he just maybe had some feelings, but
compared to today, the United States in 1971 seems like another planet in another galaxy, in a whole other universe.
73, Jamie.
It would be an understatement to say that things were going well for the reformers. But there was still one problem that hadn't been fixed, maybe the biggest one of all, the problem of money. Dirty, sweaty, corrupting money. Though the big successes of the New Deal, the Civil Rights Movement, and the Great Society eras had overcome some of that corruption, big money was still everywhere in politics and had the potential to jam up all of this amazing progress. In the mid-20th century, corruption scandals periodically rocked Washington, and one scandal even resulted in the resignation of a Supreme Court justice. So the public was becoming more and more aware.
Now, by the way, this whole thing about the money and the resignation of a Supreme Court justice, the reason why he doesn't get into it here is because it's not necessarily germane to this topic, but he's referring to Abe Fortas, who was one of LBJ's lawyers, who became a Supreme Court justice, very capable and able guy. In 1967, so this is also very important. These 5 years here between 1967 and 1972 are vitally important to understand in the entire context of our entire nation, our entire history, because we we rely on a couple of factoids at our own peril. And yeah, make it make sense. You're right. This is why it is very important to understand, especially this portion of history. So Abe Fortas was on the court. And by the way, you can read about this in Adam Cohen's book, Supreme Inequality, the Supreme Court's 50-year battle for a more unjust America. But I'll give you the bullet points. So basically, Abe Fortas took $20,000. He did some work for a guy, okay? Like some consulting work, okay? Had nothing to do with the legal system, had nothing to do with anything. That guy was indicted on another, like a corruption charge, okay? Now, Abe Fortas had done some work for him for literally, I think it was like $20,000. And he got some heat for it because this guy was on trial. But this guy was like, my affiliation with Abe Fortas, like, has nothing to do with this at all. Like, Justice Fortas, who, by the way, LBJ tried to get him, nominated him for Chief Justice in 1968 because he had convinced Earl Warren to step down. Now, you also have to keep in mind, between 1953, when Dwight Eisenhower nominated Earl Warren, right, and later regretted it, until 1968, those 15 years are the only time in our history that we have ever had a so-called liberal court. I'm not even going to use the word liberal. That was the first time we had a court that actually gave a flying about black and brown people, specifically black people. Okay? And even though they passed Brown v. Board of Education, you had YT women all over the country who were petitioning the White House, and you can read about this in Mothers of Massive Resistance, White Women and the Politics of YT Supremacy, who were petitioning the government, who were sending President Eisenhower letters saying that the entire Supreme Court needs to be impeached because they decided for Brown v. Board, right? But you'll also notice, and I haven't read this yet, it's a freaking bear, okay? But this is simple justice, and this is the history of Brown v. Board of Education and Black America's struggle for equality. I have a feeling that it's this thick because it's complicated. And why was it so complicated? It's only complicated because YT people, bye, James, because YT people make it complicated, because they will fight tooth and nail against whatever initiatives we have on the left, or whatever and whenever black people say, you know, this is a problem, this is a harm to us, right? We as YT people, we gaslight, we downplay, we deflect, we pivot, we ignore, we disregard, right? Until they get in our faces and they force a change. So that ended up being an entire slew of cases, right? All right, let's just keep going. Oh, so this was an important time because Abe Fortas was then forced off the court when Nixon took office. He sent John Mitchell, his attorney general, he sent him after Abe Fortas. And within 2 months, Abe Fortas resigned from the Supreme Court. So keep in mind, my friends, Richard Nixon got four Supreme Court nominees. Harry Blackmun. Oh my God, who was the... William Rehnquist. What's happening here? Oh, I gotta do the old puzzle piece in the thingy here to continue my live. I don't know why they say that there's no activity. I'm literally sitting here talking. Okay. Blackmun, Powell, Rehnquist, you'll see.
Aware of the problem. What Americans might not have known is that by the early 1970s, one of the biggest corruption problems of all was right there in the Oval Office, secretly recording everything.
Everything.
This is from President Richard Nixon's newly installed recording system. The audio is a bit muffled, but what you're hearing is the southern twangy voice of John Connally in the Oval Office telling Nixon that the dairy producers of America are, quote, organized, adamant, and militant.
Okay, quick note about John Connally. For those of you who don't know, or if you have heard that name before, you're like, wasn't that the guy in the... Yes, he was in the limousine, right, in the motorcade car with JFK. He was also pew-pewed. John Connally caught a bullet, okay, during that. John Connally was also part of so he was with Kennedy. He was the governor of Texas. Now he's working with Nixon. Eventually with Reagan, he would be part of the group that went to the Middle East and held up the release of the hostages under the Carter administration. And we now know this from a leaked report last year that John Connally was part of a 4-member little entourage that went there and negotiated for the Iranians to hold on to our hostages a little bit longer so that Ronald Reagan could get elected on it. Yeah, that John Connally. But this is back in 1971.
Connally was a Democrat and the former governor of Texas who survived multiple gunshot wounds when he was sitting in the car as John F. Kennedy was assassinated.
Oh, sorry.
Connally is recovered, and now here in 1971, he's the Treasury Secretary for Kennedy's arch nemesis, Nixon. This secret recording took place long
Democratic
before
governor.
Watergate. Nixon is only halfway through his first term as president, but he's already brainstorming with Connally about ways to raise campaign cash for his re-election. Connally has a big idea: milk. Connally said the milk lobbyists are, quote, amassing an enormous amount of money that they're going to put into political activities. Historically, the milk lobby had used cash to curry favor with Democrats in dairy-producing states and LBJ's administration. But Connally is telling Nixon and his aides that the milk magnates might be willing to switch sides. He's basically saying, if Nixon uses the powers of the presidency to boost the minimum price of milk, it'll enrich the powerful dairy companies, which will encourage them to then spend big to boost Nixon's re-election bid. At the end of the meeting, nothing seems to have been decided, but Connally asks for a moment alone with Nixon. The tape goes silent. A few minutes later, the recording restarts, with Nixon talking to his aides. Nixon is telling his aides that he's greenlighting Connally's plan, and Connally is going to collect the milk lobby's money for Nixon's campaign. If it seems like they're speaking in code, maybe they were. Just weeks before, Nixon's agriculture department had declined to provide higher price supports for the dairy industry. But now, the president has decided to personally intervene on the milk magnates' behalf, unilaterally ordering the government to cover 85% of the dairy company's costs. Nixon was going all out on milk. And Nixon says that in exchange for that big favor, Connally is going to squeeze the dairy companies for even more cash than what they were already funneling to Nixon's political machine. Did you hear that? Listen to it again. Yes, he's literally talking about, quote, shaking them down.
My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard.
Oh, yeah. But it gets better when Nixon's chief of staff,
He's going to shake down the milk industry, the dairy industry.
H.R. Haldeman, then responds.
They're committed to $1 million this year, and they're to us, yeah. In addition to what they're doing, they're promoting the other stuff. That's part of what we have to get set up. These committees set up. They're committed to $90,000 a month.
To clarify, Haldeman said, quote, that's part of what we had to get set up. These committees set up.
Tap and
He's
share, folks.
referring
Tap and share,
to
please. Let's get to
scores of
30,000
dummy
likes real
committees
soon.
with cartoonishly bullshit names, like the kind you now see at the end of election campaign commercials. Meaningless names like the League of Dedicated Voters, the Committee for a Better Nation, and Americans Working to Build a Better Community. And why did the Nixon White House need these committees? To hide the fact that the dairy giants were pumping a whopping $90,000 a month into Nixon's campaign machine in exchange for those milk price supports.
Hey, we're not talking
Nixon
about
was
that right
taking
now. We're
the
not talking
TV
about Israel.
ads
We're not
for
talking
milk
about
at the
Israel
time,
or Palestine.
literally
Thank you so much.
milking the donors
You can go somewhere else
for
to
as
talk about
much
that.
as he
We're not
could
talking
get.
about that
What
here,
good
so buzz
things
off.
go
Thanks.
with milk? Hamburgers and hot dogs and spaghetti and meatballs.
And apparently, money. Dirty, sweaty, corrupting campaign money also goes well with milk. But
Yeah, it
Nixon
does.
was about to regret taking such a big gulp. Joining me for this next part is Master Plan editor Ron Doyle.
Hey, David.
Okay, Ron, why is this important in the story of corruption in America?
That's a great question. And honestly, I was pretty skeptical when you and the producers told me that you wanted our first episode to be about milk prices. especially since the dairy debacle wasn't even Nixon's first scandal.
That's right.
But as you mentioned before, 1971 was a pivotal year for American progress. So at the same time that Nixon was secretly trading dairy price supports for campaign cash, Congress was also debating the most serious anti-corruption legislation since the Federal Corrupt Practices Act of 1925.
So lawmakers at the time could point to this dirty dairy deal as more proof of why America needed campaign finance reform.
Exactly. And I also think it showed average Americans why they should care. The scandal transformed an abstract concept like campaign finance reform into a real-world problem. Nixon was so desperate for campaign money that he jacked up the minimum price of milk to get it. That thrust the story into the national spotlight.
The Wall Street Journal blared a front-page headline, "Milk and Money. Flood of campaign cash to help Nixon campaign follows hike in dairy supports." The Washington Post just called it "milking dollars for Nixon." Even America's favorite newsman, Walter Cronkite, weighed in.
Early last March, Agriculture Secretary Hardin announced that federal milk support prices for 1971 would remain at current levels. About 2 weeks later, big dairy firms went to the White House to protest to President Nixon, and within 2 days, Hardin did an about-face, saying that research had shown a need for higher supports. Subsequently, dairy interests have raised thousands of dollars in campaign funds for Mr. Nixon, with the money already flowing to newly created organizations in Washington.
But the campaign finance legislation moving through Congress wasn't just about spilled milk. It was also an attempt to address the soaring cost of campaigns in the TV era. With so many Americans glued to their televisions, politicians who wanted to communicate with voters needed to raise more and more money to run television ads, like this one, which might be my favorite from the time period.
You remember this ad?
Okay, so
Anybody
this
remember hearing
commercial
about
starts out with a cute little girl plucking petals from a daisy.
Yeah.
And then it ends with a nuclear blast and a giant mushroom cloud.
These are the stakes.
Man, that is so dark. That was an infamous ad that Lyndon Johnson's campaign ran in 1964 when Johnson was up against Senator Barry Goldwater. And ads like that were tremendously expensive and exploding the cost of running campaigns.
Woo! And those costs were starting to dominate the political conversation. Even Nixon agreed that something needed to change.
Hey, Lisa.
When he was pressed by ABC News in this interview.
Me, the greatest danger to our democracy is soaring election costs. What is your view about those election costs?
I recall when I ran for the House of Representatives, the campaign cost $25,000. That was in 1946. Right now, I don't think you can run a House campaign for less than $100,000 in any district, except perhaps a rather safe district for an incumbent. So the problem is not the control of the cost. The problem is how.
When we found this tape, I was sort of shocked. It was wild to hear Richard Nixon admitting that money in politics was a problem.
Yeah, I never expected to hear him say this.
We do favor a limitation on expenses. There's no question about that.
Wow. So he was going on record saying the White House supported the campaign finance reforms.
Yes.
Well, yeah, but that's not the whole story.
Sort of.
Yeah. While the president was claiming to support reforms in front of a TV camera, behind the scenes, Nixon officials were quietly working to kill off the legislation.
And we're not making assumptions here. One of our producers went digging around in the National Archives and found shockingly frank evidence of their duplicity. Check this out.
Okay, so if you're just getting here, we're talking about master plan, the lever. This is the about legalized corruption over the last 50 years. It starts in 1971 with the Powell memo. Yes, it started before that too, but this was the foundation for this, right? Starting at 1971, the Powell memo, which is basically the granddaddy, the grandmommy, the grand them, the grand human of Project 2025. So as soon as I saw Project 2025, I was like, oh, it's the Powell memo, but just like nastier and meaner and more transparently bigoted.
Here's a memo entitled, quote, Election Reform from White House counsel John Dean to Chuck Colson.
We should explain who Chuck Colson is.
Yep.
Colson was a Rasputin-like White House aide and a Watergate conspirator. Nixon's chief of staff called him the president's hitman.
And John Dean was Nixon's lawyer at the White House. In this memo from May 1971, Dean tells Colson to, quote, make an inventory of your respective Washington representatives and trade groups, with a view towards having them get involved in fighting election reform legislation.
Wow.
Oh, it gets worse. Dean goes on to say these groups could quietly go to the Hill and tell members of the House and Senate that if they continue to support this legislation, they will be cutting off financial support from these groups.
So in short, the Nixon administration's lawyer told Nixon's top henchmen to organize business groups to threaten lawmakers with financial punishment if they back this legislation designed to fight corruption.
Yeah. I mean, really, that kind of vindictive behavior was pretty on brand for the Nixon White House, but the power play didn't work. Lawmakers truly felt the need to do something, and they ultimately passed campaign finance reform legislation.
It was known as the Federal Election Campaign Act, or FECA.
FECA?
Yeah, man, I know what it sounds like. Grow up, dude. Anyway, the bill passed the House with a landslide of support. 334 yeas and only 20 nays.
The House of Representatives today passed and sent to the President the first major reform legislation on campaign
Some
spending
hard
in
news
50
would be great,
years.
folks. Thank you,
It would set limits on campaign advertising on radio, television, and other media, and it would require extensive reports on campaign expenditures.
Nixon's henchmen had failed to sabotage the bill. Publicly, Nixon probably loathed every aspect of this legislation.
And by the way, this is what they do, right? They will talk about it in the third person, very passive voice. Look, there's a famous picture of Ronald Reagan signing the Voting Rights Act extension in 1982. Now, I didn't even know about this until I read. I do this all the time. And you can find out about that in this book, Reconsidering Reagan, Racism, Republicans, and the Road to Trump. Okay? And yeah, please do a heart meet. Everybody do a heart meet. Claim your points. Let's get this live up. Thank you, Edith. There's a picture of Ronald Reagan signing it with a smile on his face. But believe me, Ronald Reagan wanted nothing to do with re-upping that Voting Rights Act. And one of the reasons why that's important to know is because his clerk, he was trying to leverage his relationship with William Rehnquist. William Rehnquist's clerk, Rehnquist, who was nominated by Richard Nixon, and a raging bigot who was eventually our Chief Justice for like 15 years, 20 years, almost 20 years. During a very crucial time, hey, Paulie, what was I going to say? See what happens? Just going to hit play. This is the ADHD. It's the ADHD.
He was compelled to sign it into law on February 7th.
President Nixon signed into law today the most extensive reform in federal election spending in half a century. Mr. Nixon said he is confident that it will guard against campaign abuses and help build public confidence in the election process.
Before this new law was enacted, the world of campaign finance was a no-holds-barred, Wild West shit show. The previous laws have been described as, quote, more loophole than law, and politicians faced no accountability. They could pretty much get away with trading favors for campaign cash all in secret. The new bill, FECA, held out hope that the era of dirty money was coming to an end. So that's it. That's the whole podcast, folks. America capped off its golden era of reform legislation by finally giving itself a civilized campaign finance system in 1971, and the rest is history. We have clean elections, tough enforcement of anti-corruption laws, a government that routinely passes legislation that helps millions of people rather than big corporate donors, and we all lived happily ever after here in the utopia of Aaron Sorkin's The West Wing. The end! Phew, great work, everybody. That's a wrap. Awesome podcast, man. Hang on. My phone is ringing. Hello? No? Wait, what? Oh, okay. Right. My bad. We don't have any of those things today.
Shit.
In fact, we have the opposite.
Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito took an undisclosed fishing trip to Alaska with billionaire donors, including hedge fund manager Paul Singer, who later had business before the court.
Menendez accused of accepting bribes of cash and those gold bars to use his political influence for businessmen.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is acknowledging he took trips on a private plane owned by a Republican donor last year.
They really do seem to want to get rid of the criminalization of corruption and bribery.
This dystopia is our reality now. Everywhere you turn, there's a breathtaking amount of corruption happening right out there in plain sight.
Breathtaking.
How did this happen? How did we go backwards? Over the next several episodes, you're going to find out.
Should we do one more?
It wasn't an accident. There's been a decades-long master plan in the works to legalize political corruption and make America into the kind of place that works only for the rich, the connected, and the powerful. This story starts in the 1970s, but it continues today in everything from legislation
Get to 30,000.
to court rulings to Republicans' newest policy agenda dropped right into the middle of the 2024 presidential campaign.
The Conservative Heritage Foundation leading this draconian and at times extreme policy plan, Project 2025, which has all been written out, a 900-page sort of wish list or proposal for the second term.
In this series, you're going to learn about the man and the manifesto that set the master plan in motion.
Congratulations, Lewis. You have just been elected to the board of directors of Philip Morris Incorporated.
You'll hear about Supreme Court cases that chipped away at democracy and opened the floodgates of money.
Money is speech. Speech is protected.
And you'll learn how all of this created the hellscape that we live in today.
It can't be for a political favor. It can't be, I'll do this official act for you if you vote a certain way. That doesn't fly. It's got to be money.
Our next stop on this journey is right after Richard Nixon reluctantly signed that early campaign finance bill. Plans to undermine that law and plans for the Watergate break-in are now underway, but the public doesn't know it yet. In fact, Nixon's top aide is on television telling everyone that a brand new era of clean government has begun.
And I think after the history of this first term is written and you look back, you're going to see that compared to other administrations or by any standard you'd want to apply, that it has been an extraordinarily clean, corruption-free administration because the president insists on that.
That's next time on Master
Richard Nixon. Okay, so basically what happens? Well, when Richard Nixon first ran for president in 1960, right, what was the main thing that got him in trouble? It was TV, right? So you had, when he said back in 1946, when he ran for Congress, right, TV wasn't even a factor, okay? So he said it costs about $25,000. He said it's about 4 times that now, the money needed. Why? Because you need to reach a wider audience and because you need to pay for TV ads. So there's this other medium now that's part of the process. And it was getting more competitive. And you saw a turnover in the courts. And you see the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act and desegregated schools. Like, we've kind of upended, right, at least on paper, a lot of these YT supremacist systems. So that combined with the new media, right, and the shifting demographics of the suburbs and the cities, right? Suddenly electoral politics is a much different game now. So he went to the milk lobby and said, look, I can give you some help here, right? But in order to do that, I'm going to, right, ask something of you. So there's this whole thing about having, giving money, right? Paying for privilege, paying for votes, paying for influence. So he said, if we fix these milk prices, I could take care of this for you. Now, in the meantime, there's a big push by most Americans to have some kind of campaign finance reform. So the big question is, how do we stem the tide for presidential elections, for federal elections? How do we stem this tide of having all this money flowing in? We have to have some controls on it. So even though he publicly said, yeah, there's support for it, right? Behind the scenes, it was, we know it's inevitable. So if there's going to be a bill, we need to make sure that we do what eventually we heard Clinton and that Congress and Donna Shalala doing, right? It's like supporting it, but then you had this loophole, and so then he was able to kill it. Now, we don't know. We're not sitting here saying that Bill Clinton intentionally and unilaterally killed that bill, but I think the example that he's using here is that even when a bill is signed, right, as I mentioned before, even when a bill is brought to the president, or what seems like, right, the bill that is actually going to be passed, doesn't end up being the bill that's passed. And so in that case, and in this case, they found loopholes. Now, in that case, the bill was unalived right away, right? Clinton didn't even sign it. Okay. But in this case, the FECA Act was signed. Federal Election Campaign Act was signed. And it set up the Federal Election Commission. The problem is that there are loopholes in there, and that's what they spent the next 50 years undermining, and they already had plans to do it at the start. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So, let's, yeah, LMAO, right. You're funny. All right. So now I'm going to move on to episode 2. Are we clear on that? Anybody want to come up who's not a troll and comment on this? If you do, please ask up. You can just offer any thoughts. And in the meantime, we're going to go to the second episode here. Hold on. Let's see what we got at the end of this. Okay, so this is the other Watergate. So just put a 1 in the comments if we're kind of clear so far on where we're at. Like and share, like and share. I know when I use the pre-recorded stuff, it's like it doesn't get into the FYP as quickly. It's, I don't know. It's a whole different. The algorithm is like, rah. All right. Well, speaking of Virginia, I don't know what that is. What is Vogler? Virginia City Councilman. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. A man confronted him before dousing him with a flammable. Good God. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful to read about just now. No, seriously, thank you for sharing that. Oh my God.
People of consequence are questioned on the issues of our time by Elizabeth Drew on 30 Minutes With.
It was September 7th, 1972, about 7 months after President Richard Nixon had signed the Federal Election Campaign Act. 30 Minutes With was a weekly public affairs program that broadcast on a newfangled TV network called PBS.
Tonight, John D. Ehrlichman.
Mr. Ehrlichman, as the top assistant to the President for Domestic Affairs, I'd like to ask you some questions, beginning with what the Nixon administration might do if it's reelected and has 4 more years in office.
The host, Elizabeth Drew, was a Washington correspondent for the Atlantic Monthly. Her bouffant hairdo and bright green blouse created a stark contrast to the man in the dark suit sitting across from her. Like all political journalists, Drew had been closely following the various scandals and questionable activities cropping up around President Nixon in the months since he had signed the nation's first major anti-corruption legislation in decades.
You gave an interview to the Christian Science Monitor earlier this year, and you said that in his campaign the president was going to be able to point with pride to having, quote, gotten Washington away from the Bobby Baker syndrome.
Bobby Baker was Lyndon Johnson's top Senate aide who had to resign in 1963 in a bribery scandal. Drew is basically asking if Nixon kept his promise to drain the swamp.
There have been various controversies now around this administration, the break-in of the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate. Do these things keep the president from pointing with pride to this sort of thing in the campaign?
No, I don't think so. As far as the Watergate thing is concerned, I know just about as much about it as you do, probably less, except I do know very definitely that people in the government, in the White House particularly, are simply not involved in that.
Yeah, you heard that right. No involvement with Watergate, according to John Ehrlichman.
No.
The Nixon aide, who America would soon learn was literally the man who oversaw Watergate. But here we are just months before the 1972 election, and Ehrlichman is appearing on television to portray the Nixon administration as good government reformers, an argument bolstered by Nixon having recently signed the campaign finance reform bill.
Now, you have to understand, folks, Watergate was a campaign finance scandal. And I remember in 2016, when I saw Trump and who he was nominating as, to his cabinet positions, and you look at all these people, and what Bush had, right? They're all Nixonians. They're all Nixon's people. 2016, 2024, this whole movement is a backlash for them getting busted during Watergate. That's what this is. It's their never again. As morbid as that sounds, it's their never again. Never again are they going to cave. Never again are they going to give in. Never again are they going to say or do anything that is going to jeopardize their master plan. That's why Robert Bork, who you're going to see a lot of in this, Robert Bork was the last Supreme Court nominee to actually sit in front of Congress and actually say what he thought, what he really thought. Because he was not confirmed. And Robert Bork was one of the people who, along with William Rehnquist, wrote the speech for Barry Goldwater to read on the Senate floor to to convince the Senate not to vote for the Civil Rights Act. That was Bork and Rehnquist. Rehnquist was already on the court by the time Bork was nominated in 1987. But as a 14-year-old kid, I didn't know who this guy was. I didn't know he was sort of considered like the father of originalism, which is horrific and awful. And you can read more about that in Erwin Chemerinsky's Worse Than Nothing, or Madiba Denny's, which I recommend even more because she's a black woman. And Chemerinsky is great, but I think Madiba's book is even a little bit better. The Originalism Trap, How Extremists Stole the Constitution and How We the People Can Take It Back. Also a nice compendium to this series. Okay. So here we go.
I think after the history of this first term is written and you look back, you're going to see that compared to other administrations or by any standard you'd want to apply, that it has been an extraordinarily clean, corruption-free administration because the president insists on that.
That's exactly what I think of when I think of the Nixon administration. Clean and corruption-free.
Yes.
Ehrlichman here is trying to whitewash the White House.
And the tag of what I was saying a few moments ago is that this is all, their never again is, we'll never get caught, we'll never say no, we'll never, we'll always deny, never apologize, nothing. That's why Donald Trump never apologizes, because Roy Cohn, who sat next to Joe McCarthy on one side and with Richard Nixon on McCarthy's other side, right? Joe McCarthy, the HUAC guy, the anti-commie guy in the 1950s, his two right-hand men were literally at his right side, Roy Cohn, and on his left side, Richard Nixon. Yes. And what did Roy Cohn tell Donald Trump? Never apologize, never back down, never say you're wrong, always double down. Always.
In a performance that goes way beyond spin. This is an early version of the cover-up. While Nixon may have publicly signed that campaign finance bill, behind the scenes, the administration was neck-deep in corruption and was working hard to keep it under wraps. This series is about the master plan to legalize corruption in America, a plan that first emerged from the cauldron of Watergate. Pieces of that Watergate story will sound familiar, but in this episode, we're going to tell you things you've probably never heard before.
Aha!
Think of this moment in 1972 as the opening salvo in a long game that stretches to the moment we're living in right now.
I told you.
A game with wins and losses, where some of the players...
By the way, when this begins to open up like a magnificent flower, or as Diane Wiest refers to it in Bullets Over Broadway, I can't say it. Unless you've seen the movie and you know what I'm about to say, you'd be surprised if I told you what the line was. But it's one of her classic lines from Bullets Over Broadway. And if you happen to know it, give me a little wink emoji in the chat. Diane Wiest's great line to John Cusack in Bullets Over Broadway. Life will open up like a magnificent vagina. Okay, anyway.
Are trying to shore up protections against corruption, while others are seeking ways to remove those guardrails. I'm David Sirota, and this is Master Plan.
Well, I'm hoping we do get back to this kind of journalism. He's amazing. Sirota's amazing. And I highly recommend this.
Thinking of a master plan.
What? Uh-oh. All right, guys.
It's 1972, 5 months before Ehrlichman's interview on 30 Minutes With, and just a few days before key parts of the Federal Election Campaign Act are set to take effect. The men began arriving at Dulles International Airport on the edge of Washington, D.C. It was springtime in the nation's capital.
It was.
Those guys arriving at the airport were carrying bags, briefcases, satchels, attaché cases were popular. And their bags were filled with money.
Money.
Literally stuffed with cash.
Bags of money.
Lots of cash.
Lots.
From the airport, they'd drive directly to the same place, 1701 Pennsylvania Avenue,
Bummer.
just 1 block away from the White House. Where were they going? The Office of the Campaign to Re-elect the President, CREEP.
Creep.
Yes, Richard Nixon's campaign was called CREEP. Pretty on brand. Inside of CREEP's office, workers were frantic. Political campaigns are used to dealing with large amounts of money. But
Hey, Nuka.
this was very different.
Yeah, you really can't make this stuff
Hey,
up.
Mosley.
One day, a top executive from Pennzoil showed up at CREEP and handed over $150,000 in cash and $550,000 in checks and stock certificates.
What?
This is master plan producer Laura Krantz.
There was a New Jersey financier that sent over a worn leather bag with $200,000.
By the way, okay, that's one of the heads of Pennzoil. Now, I don't know if you remember, but Pennzoil, okay, was a motor oil company. Who was the spokesperson for Pennzoil for years? One of America's most beloved human beings. Anybody? Who the spokesperson for Pennzoil was?
Of neatly wrapped $100 bills. Howard Hughes's rep dropped off blank checks for the campaign to fill in themselves.
How do I get one of those?
I know, right? And get this, in just 1 2-day period, CREEP handled about $6 million. That's about $45 million in today's money.
No surprise that much of that money was coming from the kinds of donors who wanted political favors from the Nixon White House. From approval of mergers to get-out-of-jail-free cards to the dairy price supports that you heard about in episode 1.
Right, but David, you just said that
The answer is
Nixon had
Arnold
already
Palmer, by the way.
signed FICA. Wasn't it supposed to limit donations and make info about them public?
It was, but CREEP had found a way to get around the guardrails, and the mastermind of all this was G. Gordon Liddy.
Okay, so you understand? So they passed FICA, but they had a loophole, and now they found their way around it. How did they find their way around it? Through G. Gordon Liddy. If you don't know who G. Gordon Liddy is, look up G. Gordon Liddy. He was one of the plumbers. Now, if you don't know who the plumbers are, they're the ones that broke into the Watergate building on behalf of CREEP, the committee to hey, Witch, thank you, the committee to re-elect the president. Okay? Now, the plumbers, 2 of the plumbers were involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion just 10 years prior, as was E. Howard Hunt. Okay? More on that later. So, but G. Gordon Liddy was like this loose cannon, real crazy nut job, and he had an interesting idea.
If you're even remotely familiar with Watergate, you know who this guy is. The bald, crazy-eyed former FBI agent with the bristle-brush mustache.
Nuts.
The guy who would hold his hand over a candle to show his tolerance for pain. He's known for coming up with the Watergate burglary. But what most folks don't know is that he was also the architect of this incredibly bold plan to get around campaign finance laws. It actually was amazing, if highly sketchy.
Officially, Liddy was the general counsel for CREEP, the guy whose job it was to make sure the committee followed the law. But we got a hold of this memo he wrote to the White House about using a loophole to get around the new law.
Here's how it worked. Nixon signed FICA into law on February 7th, but the campaigns still had 60 days before they had to follow the new disclosure requirements. Liddy suggested that CREEP use this gap between the end of the old disclosure laws and the beginning of the new ones as a magical window of no campaign finance disclosure requirements at all. A window that would make it legal for Nixon's donors to secretly dump completely anonymous bags of cash onto the campaign.
Liddy's scheme ended up not being as much of a secret as Nixon's team might have wanted. The New York Times ran a front-page story about it with a line that said, quote, President Nixon's chief campaign fundraiser has been urging contributors to make their gifts to Republicans before the law takes effect on April 7th. The story also mentioned a letter from the Nixon campaign that told donors how to get around reporting their contributions.
Once word got out about the Nixon campaign's free-for-all fundraising scheme, other campaigns began following suit, both Republican and Democrat. But no one was doing it at the scale of...
Well, things have changed. Yeah, Sacred. And this is where, I mean, yes, your overall statement is correct, right? And the fact is, like, when you find a loophole, you just exploit the loophole and you say, yeah, go ahead, right? Go ahead and change it. By the way, this is the same thing that's happening in Israel right now. Israel has used a loophole in UN Resolution 242 to claim self-defense, right? We see it happening all the time. People use loopholes all the time, and they knew it. So they said, okay, fine. It'll look great to the public if we pass this, Mr. President. If you sign this, you're going to look like an amazing guy. You did clean air, you did block grants for the states, right? All on the surface, it looks great, yeah, but not so good underneath.
Creep, and the legality of it was questionable. I mean, the strategy did come from G. Gordon Liddy, not exactly the most upstanding guy.
No.
And then, of course, headlines like this one started hitting the airwaves.
The Democratic National Committee is housed in the fashionable Watergate complex. The break-in was apparently planned well in advance.
What you might not have known is that some of that anonymous money going into Creep during the magical window funded the Watergate break-in and provided hush money for the burglars.
Exactly.
At the time, no one outside of Nixon's inner circle knew what the money was being used for. This would be uncovered later, during the Watergate investigations. The burglary and the subsequent cover-up were the sexy side of that scandal,
yes.
The stuff Hollywood latched onto. So that's what we all remember today. But the secret campaign money was the real foundation of Watergate. It illustrated how deep the corruption problem still ran.
Yeah.
Even after Congress was shamed into passing FICA. And at least one set of people were aware of that corruption problem. The campaign finance watchdogs who had led the fight to pass FICA in the first place. Those watchdogs wanted to know who had donated all that money flowing into Nixon's campaign. Anonymous, remember? Only Nixon and his cronies actually knew the names. But a lawsuit was about to change that.
Okay, so you follow? So the only people who were tracking this, hello, M. Seymour. Hello, hey, Jeremiah, great to see you, buddy. Oh, my God, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, I'm finally back and live and out of jail. I'll explain it to you later, Jeremiah. It's pretty funny. I gave a little cursory explanation earlier on Danny's. So, yeah, this is key, right? The only people that were actually really looking out for this and had their eye on it were the people that got the FICA Act passed in the first place. And they knew that there would probably be some way around it. And they also must have known that there's going to be a big rush, because that's what we do, right? Before the law is passed. Nose is itchy today. Woo! But before the law is passed, there's going to be a big rush to exchange or get this money, right? I mean, in bags and into the hands of the candidates, because that's the whole point. Of course, now we know it was so ridiculous. Nixon's paranoia took over, because there's no way Nixon was actually going to lose that election. I mean, he just wasn't. I mean, I guess he was, concerned at the time, but like, there was really not much for him to worry about. Except he was a piece of shit who obviously was not ending the war in Vietnam. Anyway, all right. So keep partying, keep gifting if you don't mind. I don't ask for gifts very often, but I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, this is taking up a lot of time, and I freaking love it. I love it. Yeah, it's been an interesting time. So, also, like it, share it. Let's just get more people in here, because that would be amazing. As I've said, I would do this with 2 people. I do it with 5, 8, 10, 100, 1,000. I just want people to actually read this stuff and dig into this stuff, because it's first of all, this is enjoyable. He's great. He's a great storyteller. And this is a story that we all need to know. We need to understand. And I'm going to do, because I know people are kind of coming in and out as well, I'm probably going to do a repeat of this session, and then maybe with people who have actually listened to it already, we can have a panel, so that I know that it's centered around the conversation around this. Like, I know our tendency is, and I get like this too because I'm nervous on panels and my ADHD, which I'm talking about a good deal today, not to excuse anything, right? Not to pawn it off on something outside of myself. It's just, I recognize that this is sometimes why I get a little rambly. And thank you, thank you, thank you. Awesome. Grab your heart me's and all that stuff. And thank you for whatevers that you're giving. Really appreciate that. Slow down a little bit. I think it's really important that we dig into this because, as I've said regarding books as well, and the same thing goes with podcasts, like you can listen to it a few times. I mean, you can listen to it once, you can go through it, and you can kind of have an idea, right? And usually it's on a very, very, very surface level, like, oh yeah, I know I'm going to agree with this because it talks about campaign finance reform and the failure of that, and it talks about the corruption. And I, Mr. Smart, Ms. Smart, Miss, smart human being person says, oh yeah, well, I know about this stuff, and so I can listen to that and enjoy it, but I don't necessarily have to get too into the weeds with it because I'm already in agreement with him and I kind of know. And to that, I would say, as I said at the outset today, try going in with more of a, I know I kind of know, but I really don't know. And I think that's helpful to get you to key in on a lot of these details, which also enables you to talk about it off the cuff in a way that is, just off the top of your head, right? In conversation, so that you're not just relying on your own so-called talking points. I know that sounds a little bit controversial there, but like, even if you're coming to look, redlining is real, right? But it still can be, it still is technically a talking point. It is a point on which you are talking. But if you only say the word redlining and you don't really know how it works specifically today, as opposed to how it worked decades ago when it was technically legal, and how illegal is it now, right? You kind of have to know those details. So, right, having knowledge, I know, but I think, Jeremiah, I think we're all guilty of this. Like, I don't even want to say guilty. We all can succumb to this, where we kind of have a cursory idea about the knowledge, but we don't really get much into it. And a lot of this stuff, I think, especially with systemic racism now, we're finding that I have found, because I've done so much deep reading on it, that you have to read, you have to reread, you have to reflect, and then you have to rehearse. There's one thing I've learned about, coming to all these discoveries about white supremacy and systemic racism, and then how that's translated to Palestine and Zionism, is that you need a lot of practice. Because in both situations, right, try talking to a racism denier here, or a Zionist there, or a Zionist here, right? It's the same technique. It's very specific talking points that have no substance behind it. It's deflection, pivot. Try to hit you with a 1350 kind of statistic or something like that. And now you're sitting there talking about that for 45 minutes. And also, because they're so defensive with these talking points, that as soon as they feel like you don't give them the perfect answer that they want, right, they just dismiss what you have to say. So it's very easy to say Citizens United, Citizens United, Citizens United. It's quite another thing to say, but hold on a second. Here's what I mean by that. Here's the process. And not that you have to necessarily go on for an hour, but eventually you also rehearse like an elevator pitch for it. You rehearse different versions of it depending on what kind of conversation you're in. Obviously, if you only have a few minutes with somebody, you don't know them, you're going to have a much different kind of abbreviated like headline for it that is going to counter their talking point. If you're with a friend, it's probably going to be a little bit more. And if you have a little more time, it's going to be a little bit more detailed and in-depth. And it'll probably be them potentially interjecting, which you also have to account for. Because when you start talking about these things and people get uncomfortable about it, what's the first thing they do? They shut down and they don't want to have the conversation. So you also have to recognize when you're going a little too far with your explanation, because you might be losing them or they might be dismissing you. So it's finding that perfect balance. And I don't always have that perfect balance. There's certainly times when I've overtalked it. I mean, my name is Jabber. It's not like I've never overtalked in my life. I've probably overtalked 5 or 6 times. I'm probably overtalking right now for some of you. But it's my life, so there's nothing you can do. But I'm going to wrap it up in just a moment. The point is that every situation calls for a different kind of distillation of these facts, this data, and the supporting evidence behind it, right? Because oftentimes, especially talking about statistics, I mean, somebody can throw a statistic at you. It could be a fact, but there's zero context behind it. And I think I actually said it this morning on someone else's live, and I should have written it down because I thought it was kind of, not genius, but it was a good way for me to think about it. It was, this is not quite the word, but I said resultant statistics, or like results-based statistics. And I might be the only one who really knows what I'm talking about there. But in other words, talking about an outcome, right? It could be a statistically accurate outcome according to the data, like very real data. But it might completely lack any kind of context so that you never get to the root cause of the problem, right? And that's very easy to do when you're talking about YT supremacy, when you're talking about systemic racism. There's a whole lot of data out there, but it simply just does not tell the story, right? And like 1350 is an easy one, right? And just one example of that, one example of why 1350 is complete garbage is because there's nobody between the ages of 0 and 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 that are actually committing crimes. So that automatically knocks out a lot of that percentage of the population. Okay, so, right, and that's just one of many reasons why that is the most ridiculous argument, right? But you could spend 45 minutes talking about it. Well, let's not spend too much longer talking about it. Here we go. Back to this. Hold on, let me jump back 30 seconds.
Problem. The campaign finance watchdogs who had led the fight to pass FICA in the first place.
So these are the ones who, the campaign watchdogs are the ones that had their eye on them, right? Because they knew it was a problem and they knew it was going to be a loophole. This is why we have to, my nose is so itchy today. I swear to God, there's nothing nefarious about this. I guess somebody's thinking of me. This is why a big lesson for me coming out of this campaign, and especially what's happening with ICE right now, is I want to be there for people. I do. And fortunately, I live a couple blocks away from the federal building, so I can go check on them. The encampment over here by the federal building, you might have seen it. The other day, this young black woman, she's probably like 27, 28. She had a megaphone. I remember she had a really cool Laguna Beach sweatshirt on. I was driving by on my way to a pro-Palestinian banner drop over the freeway, which are so freaking fun, by the way. They're amazing. And I'm on my way there going up Alameda here, and I honk, and I'm like, yeah, F ICE, free Palestine. And they're like, yeah, free Palestine. I said, no, I'm on my way to a banner drop right now. They're like, oh, you should come back. I said, well, I live right down here. Ended up, she came over to the car. I fist bumped her. She was great. She had this awesome wide smile. She was so excited. I'm like, stay safe, stay sane. Awesome. She walks away. 6 hours later, I'm watching a video of her getting tackled by police. And apparently I found out from a guy in the banner group, that she got really effed up the other night. So, and I have to find out, I'm trying to find out what happened to her. So it's like, for us, like, the best thing I can do right now is to be as much of a support as I can be, but also, I've got to make sure that I'm as a cishet white guy, right? Middle-aged white guy. I have to keep one foot in, hey, what's next, right? Like, what are we doing next? Because the people for whom like a lot of this is affecting right now, it's not that I'm not there for them, but there's only so much I can actually do, right? So to stress out and become a keyboard warrior, on that can be potentially like time sucking and energy sucking from the thing that I think a lot of YT people should be doing, which is we should be looking ahead. Who's the next Supreme Court justice coming down the road? The people who are dealing with this stuff imminently right now, in many ways, it's theirs to deal with. It's ours to try to change, but oftentimes we can't change it now, and we lose sight of the fact that if we try to get ahead of it a little bit, we're not ignoring what's happening now, but we're potentially preventing what is eventually going to be the now from being as bad as it is in this now. And that's why I think this is so important, because it helps us understand a lot of the roots of this. So as far as these watchdogs, yeah, they're the only ones that are always looking ahead, right? And they knew this was going to happen. All right.
Those watchdogs wanted to know who had donated all that money flowing into Nixon's campaign. Anonymous, remember? Only Nixon and his cronies actually knew the names. But a lawsuit was about to change that.
Lawsuit?
Okay, so anonymous money poured into Nixon's campaign thanks to G. Gordon Liddy's scheme.
Bags of cash.
And a few months later, Nixon's aide John Ehrlichman appeared on PBS in that interview you heard at the top of the episode, the one where he insisted the Nixon White House was a corruption-free zone. In preparation for that interview, Ehrlichman met with Nixon in the Oval Office.
John Ehrlichman.
And Nixon seemed particularly interested in one guy.
What in the hell was John Gardner?
One guy.
Violating the Senate, the corrupt process. Oh, but for Christ's sakes, it's the law. The law.
This recording, like many of Nixon's White House tapes, is difficult to make out. But you can hear Nixon say the name John Gardner.
John Gardner.
Who is John Gardner? He'd been a cabinet official under Nixon's predecessor, Lyndon Johnson. But more recently, he'd founded a citizens advocacy group known as Common Cause.
We want public officials to have literally millions of American citizens looking over their shoulders at every move that they make.
That's John Gardner describing the mission of Common Cause.
Common Cause.
Side note, Nixon reportedly asked Gardner to be his vice presidential running mate in 1968. Gardner declined and then became one of Nixon's least favorite people. They probably wouldn't have been a good match anyway. Gardner was committed to making political institutions more open and accountable, and Nixon was committed to, well, the opposite. Common Cause wanted to know who had donated to the Nixon re-election campaign.
So Common Cause is referred to as the John Gardner, the father of campaign finance reform. Okay, that's John Gardner. All right.
During that disclosure-free window in the spring of 1972. Since no one in the White House was divulging any information, Common Cause filed a federal lawsuit. Gardner spoke about it at a press conference on September 6th, the day before Ehrlichman and Nixon met in the Oval Office.
In recent months, citizens have been treated to several highly questionable instances of huge sums flowing to the president's political campaign, while government favors flowed in the opposite direction. Perhaps the instances were all coincidental. The way to dispel the aura of mystery and suspicion is to bring all the facts out into the open. That is the purpose of our suit.
Creep thought they'd found a loophole that allowed them to temporarily raise millions of dollars anonymously. Common Cause discovered a loophole to their loophole and found a way to use an older campaign finance law against them. This might seem like boring legalese, but national news picked up the story because it was directly connected to Watergate.
The courts will have to say if such a suit under the old Corrupt Practices Act.
Okay. So we have to go back. This is very important, and this is why I find this so fascinating. And by the way, this is the shit like this. This is what we get the entire time that we're listening to this podcast. And it helps all of us. It helped me. It may not help you, but it helped me, okay, understand, along with several books, how the law and how the legal actors involved really make the law and interpret the law, and how they use and manipulate legalese and legal framing, right, to make their arguments and sway the court.
And Cause discovered a loophole to their loophole and found a way to use an older campaign finance law against them. This might seem like boring legalese, but...
Okay, so what he's saying is Gardner founds Common Cause, okay? Common Cause gets the FICA law passed. The master planners say, aha, we've got a loophole. And then Common Cause goes, we've got a loophole to your loophole. Any of you ever play Exploding Kittens? And you have that Nope card? Anybody? Exploding Kittens fans? Yes, thank you, Witch, thank you. Please send the Daily Heart me. Please send the Daily Heart me. Oh, this microphone is not for you. It's for YouTube. So anyway, this is like noping a nope. Okay? Well, Jeremiah, get on that. Play Exploding
National
Kittens.
News picked up the story because it was directly connected to Watergate.
The courts will have to say if such a suit under the old Corrupt Practices Act can be won, but the administration apparently takes it seriously enough to have asked that this suit be held off. If a suit like this were won, it would clear up a lot about the Watergate bugging, and more than that, expose just those Nixon contributors who made their contributions before April 7th in order not to be disclosed.
That was on September 6th. The next morning, Nixon and Ehrlichman planned out their response in the Oval Office.
So they're going to use another law, the Corrupt Practices Act, right? And if they can get to the root of this money, it'll be illegal under the Corrupt Practices Act, despite the fact that they got the money in before the FICA Act took effect. Got it?
This clean, corrupt...
And by the way, that's a classic example right there of the first time I listened, I wouldn't have been able to describe that to you. Now that I've listened to this for the third time, I'm getting different layers of it. So now I can pick out that little story I just told you. And because I got the repetition on it, now I can say in conversation somewhere, let me give you an example, right, of a loophole in a loophole. Now, the person can tell me what they think about that, their opinion about it, right? But at least I'm laying it out in a way that is absolutely factual, right? It's indisputable, right? This is what happened. They exploited a loophole, as anybody would do. And then Common Cause said, well, hold on, what about this loophole, right? And then they had to fight it out in the courts.
Option-free administration? It opted to go with smear tactics.
I think the line on that is Common Cause has not succeeded in raising money. They needed some high visibility maneuver, and this is obviously a last gasp by John Gardner to try and keep Common Cause afloat. He's sure an ass.
Yup, Nixon just called John Gardner an ass. He really hated this guy.
He hated him. So he's like, there's two ways we can go, and I think we're going to go this way. We're just going to smear them. This is a last gasp, Common Cause, ridiculous organization. They don't know anything, right? Of course.
A few hours later, in that PBS interview you heard at the top, journalist Elizabeth Drew asked John Ehrlichman about a brand new development having to do with donations to the Nixon campaign.
Common Cause filed a suit yesterday, as you know, to force the revelation of who contributed the $10 million to the president before April 7th. Do you think that that might bring about, before the election, any kind of revelation of who the contributors were?
Well, I don't think it should, because I think the whole spirit of the law that the Congress adopted involved a freedom from disclosure of any contributor prior to a certain date.
Make note of that. Ehrlichman is arguing that the lawless period wasn't a bug, it was a feature. He's arguing that the lawmakers who passed the new campaign finance disclosure law intentionally created a period to allow anonymous bags of cash to flow to the president's campaign. And now, these annoying campaign finance reformers want Nixon to tell America who his donors are? How dare they? Elizabeth Drew pressed Ehrlichman about this.
Right? So it's like, no. They passed the law, and this was a feature of it. This is part of it, right? We're going to pass the law, but we're going to give everybody a couple of months before we do it for this election, like as if it was an intentional thing that they wanted it to be secret, right?
Current law said they didn't have to report before April 7th, but what Common Cause suit said is that the Corrupt Practices Act was in effect until then, and that did require the publication of everybody who had contributed more than $100. So they say that the committee broke the law.
In response to this perfectly reasonable assertion, Ehrlichman whips out the smear he'd rehearsed with the president that very morning.
I suspect maybe Common Cause is looking for a little rehabilitation. I understand that Mr. Gardner and his organization are in a little difficulty in terms of being able to raise money and keep alive. So maybe this is their salvation. I don't know, but they're keeping their name in the paper anyway.
Bravo. Give that man an Oscar.
Wow.
What a performance. He delivered that line even more smoothly than he had during his practice run with Nixon that morning. But while Nixon officials were publicly brushing off Common Cause, behind the scenes, this was clearly a problem for the White House and it was not going away. The issue of disclosure was central to all of this. FICA required candidates to disclose any expenditures or contributions that exceeded $100. It required disclosure reporting for candidates, political parties, and political action committees. It also required candidates to file spending reports periodically to administrative offices deep within the bowels of the Capitol.
And we thought no one's going to look at them. And the public is not going to find out this information if reporters don't have it before them, because it would take a hell of a lot of work to review these reports.
Yep. That's Fred Wertheimer, who in 1972 was the young legislative director for Common Cause. He told us that to make sure the media and the public would get this information, he'd send volunteers up to Capitol Hill to buy photocopies of each report. Then they'd write up that information into press releases for each state and congressional district, sharing what campaign had received how much money and from whom. Over the course of the 1972 campaign, Common Cause uncovered widespread violations of the new law and filed complaints against 128 Democrats and 98 Republicans in various congressional races. It came as something of a shock to candidates to learn that someone was actually watching. But Common Cause also had its eyes at the top of the ticket on the presidential race. Following Creep's lead, other presidential campaigns had also amassed piles of money, taking advantage of the window of lawlessness. Common Cause urged all presidential candidates to reveal their pre-April 7th donations. Having brought in so much cash in such a corrupt fashion, Creep needed to keep their donors anonymous, and they had a whole laundry list of reasons explaining why. The law didn't require it. It would be unfair to donors, John Ehrlichman's argument on PBS. Other campaigns haven't done it. And even when the other campaigns did give up their donor info, Creep still refused. Here's Fred Wertheimer again.
They said nuts to you. They fought us. We sued Nixon, and within a few weeks, we got a letter from the IRS telling us they were investigating our tax status.
What a coincidence! Regardless, Common Cause pushed the lawsuit forward, even as Election Day drew closer. Facing a court order, Creep suddenly agreed to a concession. They'd hand over information about donors who gave in the first 2 months of 1972, January and February, conveniently leaving out donations from the 60-day window.
Of course.
Still, when news broke that even a partial list was being released, it caused quite a stir.
Like, the fact that this was a big deal is kind of surprising, right? Like, it was major news at the time, campaign finance. Now, I mean, it is, but it isn't, because they've loosened all the restrictions. So it's like, we just assume, because this is the new normal. But keep in mind, too, as we move along here over the next several days, because we're not going to be doing all this all the time, and who knows where we'll get to today. I don't know. I'm feeling a bit spry. I might do a third episode here. Third episode, by the way, is the actual Powell memo itself, with a special reading by Lewis Black. He reads as Lewis Powell. It's really cool. But you got to remember, like, this was scandalous, and people didn't even know much about Watergate yet. Like, they didn't know that much about it. Watergate was building until they could finally connect Nixon to it, right? And if you look at the way Trump acts today, right, it's like basically like if they were to go back and teach Nixon what to do, right, it would be never, ever having apologized. And his whole argument was it's legal because when the president does it, it's not illegal. I mean, that was his whole emphasis for the War Powers Act, the justification for a lot of what he did, including Watergate. So this was a really big scandal, and people did want to have this stuff under control. Thing is, now it's a question of how much. Now, in other words, there's another case before the Supreme Court right now where they're about to loosen the restrictions even further. You'll see there's a Politico article from, I might have it on my link tree. But it's like, they're trying to loosen the restrictions again on the maximum that you're allowed to give. And then it was not only about the amounts, but the disclosure. Now we have no disclosure, and the amounts are so off the walls, you can give anything, there's nothing to really fight for at this point. It's over. But it all started here.
Sees David Shoemaker.
And the journey of how we got to here to, you're going to see Buckley v. Vallejo in 1976, when money is speech. And then, because people need to be able to get their speech out. And then it's, the next case was about people receiving that speech. And then eventually we get to Citizens United. But there's a whole process there. And the way that they build the court, right? It's very important. We need to know this moving forward. The next 30 years, and I'm going to try to narrow, I think, my work on this app to dark money and campaign finance and intersection of Jewishness and whiteness, for sure, and the National Popular Vote Compact, and books. That's it. I mean, which the books are kind of bound up in all that, but anyway. All right, enough about me.
Reports.
In this TV clip, Gardner, with reporters in tow, is marching into Creep's offices to get the first batch of information, and he's asking to see the director of press relations, Powell Moore.
Mr. Moore did not come right out, but a security man did, and he tried to block photographers.
Lo, I'm going to come up with a schedule. I was thinking of that yesterday.
All right, don't touch me.
In the black and white footage, we see a grainy hand appear over the lens, pushing the camera down.
The security man finally gave up, and so did Gardner. After waiting in vain for 25 minutes, he walked back to his office, leaving lawyers behind to pick up their list. Reporters elbowing lawyers for their own copies.
The news story picks up later that day at the Common Cause office, where we see rooms of young volunteers. They're sporting some quintessential 70s outfits, along with handlebar mustaches, big collars, and big hair. Most of them look fresh-faced, barely out of college, as they begin to sort through the preliminary donor information they'd managed to extract from Creep. They didn't get the Holy Grail, the anonymous donor list from the secret window, but they'd gotten something.
A quick total for Chairman Gardner, just under $5 million. Heading the list, Chicago insurance man Clement Stone, $1 million reinforcing rumors he's about to be appointed ambassador to Great Britain. Next, $800,000 from Richard Scaife of the wealthy Mellon family. Arthur Watson, former ambassador to France, gave $300,000. John Mulcahy of New York, host to the president on his trip to Ireland, $255,000.
And unearthing those numbers was just the start of a tremendous amount of work. Nowadays, if we get the name of some person, we just type it into an internet search, and up pops the information we need.
Right.
But these Common Cause volunteers in 1972 are having to search for donor identities by furiously flipping through giant phone books and reference periodicals.
They're calling operators in other states using rotary phones. Do you have any idea how long that takes?
I mean, they're tapping numbers into calculators the size of toasters.
They're cross-checking all of this data with pencil and paper. My hand hurts just thinking about it.
You can see why nobody else had bothered to do this before. And this was just the tip of the iceberg. As the media pointed out, the biggest donors had yet to be unmasked.
The Republicans still have not identified their contributors for the month of March, the month the committee to re-elect the president pushed hardest for big money. The court suit on that is still to come, but there was enough information on hand for now to keep the lights at Common Cause burning through the night.
The disclosure came only a few days before the election, and it had almost zero effect on the outcome. Nixon was re-elected, defeating George McGovern in a landslide. Creep, though, still refused to turn over any information about the bags of cash from March and April during Liddy's magic window, so Common Cause continued to press their lawsuit. Their lawyers spent the early part of 1973 deposing Nixon's White House and campaign officials. All of them insisted that the records from the spring of 1972 had been destroyed, which was almost certainly true since Creep officials basically moonlighted as professional document shredders.
Yep.
But then a campaign official let slip that one document hadn't been shredded, a list of Nixon's most important contributors of all, the guys with the biggest bags of money. This list was in a locked drawer in the desk of President Nixon's personal secretary, Rosemary Woods, right next to the Oval Office.
Okay, Sacred.
This document could potentially unlock everything that Common Cause wanted to know. Obtaining it became an obsession. But secret donor list doesn't really roll off the tongue, so they gave it a catchy nickname. Fresh in the minds of Common Cause staff was a wildly popular psychological horror film that had come out a few years earlier about a young mother being secretly manipulated by an evil cult.
This is no dream. This is really happening.
The mother's name? Rosemary, just like Nixon's secretary. And that's how this coveted secret list came to be known as
Rosemary's Baby.
It took 9 months from when Common Cause filed its initial lawsuit, but Rosemary's Baby was finally delivered in June 1973. After all those court filings, motions, and counter-motions, network television reported that a federal judge officially ordered the White House to turn the list over.
The White House confirmed today that it has a copy of the list of campaign donations received before the new April 7th reporting deadline. Assistant Press Secretary Gerald Warren insisted the president has never seen the list.
And what a list it was, really more of a book. Coming in at a whopping 1.5 inches thick, it showed contributions that added up to more than $19 million in undisclosed donations to Nixon's re-election fund. All in all, Creep raised nearly $55 million. That's the equivalent of, let me get my calculator here, $407 million in today's dollars.
Okay, now it's funny you mention another list, because remember, this is 1970, this is 72, okay? This is late 72. Jeffrey Epstein gets hired 2 years later by Donald Barr. Donald Barr's son, William Barr, was our Attorney General, ladies and gentlemen. At the Dalton School, he was the head master. His son, William, was working in the Nixon Justice Department back in 1971-72. Another Nixon guy, Bill Barr. Think about that. Yeah. Think about some of the other things surrounding, right? The Nixonian movement coming out of, yeah, what a web. What a web indeed. What a web indeed. Now, what's interesting is Nixon was very open about and transparent about later in his life, you know, the relationship with Israel and how fraught it was. But you have to wonder, I don't know. Anyway.
An eye-popping amount, and much of it had been kept a secret.
You already know that Secretary Richardson has asked me to prosecute the offenses growing out of the breaking into the Watergate and other related allegations.
That's Archibald Cox in May 1973, accepting the job of special prosecutor with the United States Department of Justice. He's tall, with a buzz cut, and looks better in a bow tie than Tucker Carlson ever did. Cox would oversee the federal criminal investigation into the failed Watergate burglary, which had happened just shy of a year earlier. And his name is pretty familiar to anyone with even a passing knowledge of Watergate. And Watergate was huge. Cox understood that one investigation would be insufficient and incredibly unwieldy. This was too big, and it went far beyond the bungled burglary that we're all so familiar with. So he divided the investigation into task forces.
Yeah, so a few of them investigated Watergate itself, the break-in, the political dirty tricks, and the infamous White House plumbers' efforts to stop leaks.
But 2 other task forces focused on the part of Watergate that's often forgotten. The corruption.
One looked at a scandal in which one of the country's largest telephone companies pledged $400,000 to the Republican Party in exchange for a favorable Nixon administration settlement in an antitrust lawsuit.
And the final task force, the one that's most important to our story, focused on campaign contributions. The mission of these prosecutors was straightforward.
Follow the money. Just follow the money.
The Campaign Contribution Task Force honed in on that dairy scandal that we talked about in the first episode, the $2 million that the Associated Milk Producers gave to Nixon's campaign in 1971. But it was that window in the spring of 1972, before FICA came into effect, where the task force focused much of its attention.
Yeah.
Who had contributed to the mountains of cash that came rolling into Nixon's re-election war chest? Were any of those donors promised government favors or threatened with government retribution if they failed to pay up? Just how legal or illegal was all of that money? Thanks to John Gardner and Common Cause, the question of who had been partially answered. Those names were now in the hands of Watergate prosecutors, including a young lawyer named Roger Witten, who spoke to us about his work during this period.
I didn't know anything about any subject we were we were confronting when I walked in the door. For a young lawyer at the beginning of his career without any prosecutorial experience, it was exciting and it was scary. The spotlight was shining brightly on us, and we wanted to do it right and fairly.
Witten had been Archibald Cox's student at Harvard Law School, and in 1973, he joined the Watergate Special Prosecution Force. He'd be working to find any evidence of illegal campaign finance activity.
It was clear fairly early on that the hush money paid to the Watergate burglars came directly or indirectly from illegal campaign contributions.
But the Campaign Contributions Task Force wanted to know more about the contributions themselves. As we've heard throughout this episode, the Nixon campaign had made a big push to get as much money as possible before FICA went into effect. The reason for that push was because FICA's disclosure requirements went way beyond those of the older law, the Federal Corrupt Practices Act.
And we wondered, why were they so interested in making secret contributions? What were they trying to hide? And that's the question we tried to answer. And in a number of cases, we were able to show that they were seeking influence by making large contributions secretly to the president's re-election campaign.
Yep. The information on who had donated to Nixon's campaign came from a variety of sources. Members of CREEP, the president's personal lawyer, reporting from the press corps, hat tip to Woodward and Bernstein, and of course, the Rosemary's Baby list obtained by Common Cause.
Somehow this great mass of information got sorted into charges or not charges against companies and people.
And who were those companies and people?
I made a little list. There was the milk investigation, which had its own sub-team. I thought milk was healthy and clean, but it wasn't. There were a number of well-known large companies: Gulf Oil, Ashland Oil, Northrop, Phillips Petroleum, Goodyear, Occidental.
Since FICA hadn't yet gone into effect when this money made its way into Nixon's coffers, the Watergate Corruption Task Force had to rely on older criminal statutes in order to press charges. Up until this point, those laws went almost unenforced. But amid the Watergate scandal, prosecutors were now going to aggressively enforce their prohibition against corporate money flowing directly into campaigns. As the prosecution began charging companies and officials, Witten says they offered leniency to corporations that came in voluntarily to self-disclose and cooperate with the investigation.
We were quite open to plea bargains because, frankly, we didn't have the resources to try 20 cases. We thought also that we could accomplish a lot by holding these companies and these senior executives up to public scrutiny.
We live in an era where corporate executives almost never get prosecuted for anything, where bankers can rip off millions of homeowners and oil CEOs can light the climate on fire with no consequences. But notice how Witten said that back in 1973, government prosecutors looking at corruption were going after both huge blue-chip companies and their individual corporate executives. This is a big deal and almost unimaginable today. Watergate prosecutors were trying to send a very specific message.
We were not going to just let the corporation dig into its pocket and pay. The guilty pleas in the plea bargains were a deterrent to others not to engage in this misconduct. Because even though you're pleading guilty to a misdemeanor, it's not a high priority of a CEO of a name brand company to go to court and confess guilt in connection with a crime.
On October 17, 1973, Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox issued a statement indicating that both the corporations and their primary responsible corporate officers would be charged. That same day, news outlets eagerly reported on the fallout.
3 big U.S. corporations pleaded guilty today to making each more than $125,000 in illegal contributions to President Nixon's 1972 campaign.
The firms are Goodyear Tire and Rubber, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, and American Airlines.
In court, attorney Herbert Miller said the airline pleaded guilty. Reportedly, its $55,000 donation was laundered through accounts in Lebanon. Prosecutor Thomas McBride warned that he will seek tougher penalties, which could mean jail for corporation executives who do not come forward as American Airlines did.
By the way, I remember being a teenager and first learning about Watergate from a TV miniseries in the 1990s that included this commercial.
This presentation of Watergate is sponsored in part by American Airlines.
I guess I didn't realize how on the nose that really was. In essence, Watergate was the first campaign finance scandal of the modern era, and it exposed incredible corporate corruption.
When I first heard of the Powell
Ultimately,
memo.
the Campaign Contribution Task Force obtained convictions of 19 companies and 21 executives for making illegal corporate contributions to President Nixon's campaign, which then used some of that money to fund activities like the Watergate break-in. Remember John Ehrlichman's claim?
By any standard you'd want to apply, it has been an extraordinarily clean, corruption-free administration.
Yeah, not so much. And then Nixon decided to make things worse for himself. Just 3 days after Cox's press conference and the guilty pleas of those big companies, Nixon ordered Archibald Cox to be fired. The 2 top men at the Justice Department refused to do it, so it fell to the third in line, Robert Bork, a name we'll hear again and again in this series. The firing of Cox was part of what became known as the Saturday Night Massacre. The public was outraged. In an effort to contain the fallout, Nixon gave a televised press conference.
I made my mistakes. But in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent.
Side note, he gave this speech at Disney World, which is worth mentioning because we'll be back to the Magic Kingdom in the not-too-distant future. Bookmark Disney World. A lot of weird shit happens there.
I have never obstructed justice. I welcome this kind of examination because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Obviously, the best way to assure people you're not a criminal is to desperately insist that you're not a criminal.
Obviously. But by the time Nixon delivered that now famous line, the damage was done.
Oh, yeah.
Millions of Americans had been watching the nationally televised Senate Watergate hearings unfold under the leadership of Senator Sam Ervin, who honed in on the link between corruption, campaign finance, and the burglary.
Didn't you suspect that when you raised this money and distributed in this surreptitious manner to the lawyers and families of the parties that had been indicted in the Watergate, that you were aiding the Nixon campaign for re-election?
Americans glued to their televisions heard the dramatic stories about bags of cash, political intrigue, and straight-up corruption. Even before the Saturday Night Massacre, a Gallup poll confirmed that Americans considered government graft one of the most important problems facing the nation. Campaign finance and political corruption would be key issues in the upcoming 1974 midterm elections. And thanks to Nixon, the Democrats, along with a coalition of reformers and organizations like Common Cause, saw both a political opportunity and a chance to fix the system.
Yeah.
They began pushing a package of amendments that would strengthen the 1971 Federal Election Campaign Act.
I think this is the single most important issue that can be resolved by this Congress.
Hey, Laura, does that voice sound vaguely familiar?
No, not ringing a bell. Who is it?
That's Joe Biden in a televised debate back when he was a fresh-faced 31-year-old senator.
Listen to this.
He was one of the lawmakers involved in passing amendments to strengthen FICA. Now, it would have been delicious to see supervillain Richard Nixon shamed into signing new, even tougher anti-corruption bills into law. But he'd already thrown in the towel by the time they passed.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
That left Gerald Ford holding the pen. He'd been a long-time Republican leader in the U.S. House, and Ford probably didn't like the new, tougher campaign finance legislation any more than Nixon would have. We'll hear more about old Jerry in a future episode. But the political climate meant Ford had no choice but to grit his teeth and sign the bill during a televised ceremony.
A major legislative outgrowth of the Watergate scandal was the Campaign Financing Reform Bill. And President Ford signed that into law in a ceremony today.
The president invited Congress in to watch, and about 100 members showed up for the East Room ceremony. Among other things, the bill limits the amount individuals can contribute to candidates, puts a $20 million spending limit on presidential races, and provides some public financing of the presidential campaigns through voluntary $1 deductions, which voters can take on income tax.
When signing the bill, President Ford explicitly acknowledged how angry the public was at the corrupt.
Sorry, I'm going to jump back. Let's hear that again.
Political climate meant Ford had no choice but to grit his teeth and sign the bill during a televised ceremony.
A major legislative outgrowth of the Watergate scandal was the Campaign Financing Reform Bill. And President Ford signed that into law in a ceremony today.
The president invited Congress in to watch, and about 100 members showed up for the East Room ceremony. Among other things, the bill limits the amount individuals can contribute to candidates, puts a $20 million spending limit on presidential races, and provides some public financing of the presidential campaigns through voluntary $1 deductions, which voters can take on income tax.
When signing the bill, President Ford
So limits and some public financing, right?
Explicitly acknowledged how angry the public was at the corruption that had taken over Washington.
I can assure you from what I've heard from the American people in writing and other communications, they want this legislation. So it'll soon be law. We do recognize that this legislation seeks to eliminate to a maximum degree some of the influences that have created some of the problems in recent years. And if that is the end result, certainly it's worth all the labor and all the compromises that were necessary in the process.
Wow, what a wild trip it's been. Without the original FICA and that magical window of lawlessness, those bags of secret money may never have been dumped into Nixon's campaign. Without that money and all the corruption and scandal that came out of Watergate, these reforms may never have happened.
There you go.
If, as the old saying goes, every crisis is an opportunity, then the work of reformers and organizations like Common Cause made sure that when something as bad as Watergate happened, it could become a moment for progress.
You see?
Fred Wertheimer again.
Watergate was the trigger because the public would not have engaged. People would have not have been outraged. The stories would not have been there.
My friends.
Look, I've worked on this since 1971. We passed the Watergate reforms in '74 because we had enormous public support and demand.
And so here we are once more, dear listener. The forces of corruption have been repelled. The man who had come to personify corruption had been ejected from the White House in what seemed like a national referendum for a cleaner government, free of big money influence. But of course, we have several episodes to go.
Right.
And we now live in a kleptocracy that makes Watergate seem quaint, which means this is not where the story ends. This is where the story really begins.
Exactly.
Because even though he was forced into an early California retirement, Richard Nixon had left the American people a present, a time bomb back in Washington, one that was ticking away.
Carl, if you'll raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Lewis F. Powell, Jr. I, Lewis F. Powell, Jr. Do solemnly swear. Do solemnly swear. That I will administer justice. That I will administer justice. As Associate Justice. As Associate Justice. Of the Supreme Court of the United States. Of the Supreme Court of the United States. So help me God. So help me.
This is where it gets bad.
That's next time on Master Plan.
So, my friends, here's what's happening, right? The American public was calling for it. This was out of Watergate. What you're seeing now is a response, a 10-year response. Well, 50-year response, but especially in the last 10 response to Watergate.
Master Plan is a production of The Lever. This episode was written and produced by Jared Jacang Mayer, Laura Krantz, and me. David Sirota.
And they
Our
are
production
consolidating
team includes
power,
Ula Kulpa,
and they've done
Arjun
it
Singh,
through
and Ronnie Riccobene.
campaign finance
No pun
reform.
intended. As we've just heard, no pun intended.
And, oh, wait, hold on.
As we've
So,
How infamous Powell memo.
The Powell memo.
The Powell memo.
Hold on.
Thing of an artifact.
And so, yeah, and the Powell memo has so much to do with it. And their manufactured fears of the left and this threat to the capitalist system. The Powell memo was basically saying the premise is our entire free enterprise system is under attack. And he quotes and cites groups on the left like the Black Panthers, for example. You'll also see coming out of this period in 1972, 73, I believe early 74. So right around this time, because this was in 74 that Nixon stepped down, you had, oh my God, am I getting tired already? I was just about to say with something with Israel. And, the new anti-Semitism, which is an American book, right? But about this like new anti-Semitism, and it was the anti-Semitism on the left. It was something that really took hold. 1973, you had the 73 war, the October, Yom Kippur, in October 73. And also, like, you had a lot of anti-Zionist writers like Jean Amery, who, the Israelis were brutal at the time. And John Emery was an Auschwitz survivor who was a writer. He wrote a book called On Suicide. It's the name of one of his books. Love TikTok Shop. Just had to say that was just the title of the book for educational purposes only. And then he eventually did unalive himself a year later over that. And so this is like a particularly fraught time internationally. The United Nations had declared Zionism racist. And this was like the beginning of the flight to the suburbs. This is when the baby boomers were having kids. I was born in 73. My sister was born in 70. This is when they were starting to have children. So this is like 2 or 3 years removed from the Fair Housing Act. It's like a very, very interesting time when an entire generation was growing up, right? Very populous generation, and like taking over the suburbs, leaving all the cities in shambles. Because of the white flight, because of the opportunity hoarding, because of just boxing black people into tight spaces. Not that there weren't black homeowners, but even in those neighborhoods, like highly segregated, away from work areas, companies were taking over. I mean, James Lowen talks about it in Sundown Towns, but it's part of it. And Richard Rothstein talks about it in The Color of Law. When the suburbs formed, you had a lot of people starting businesses or moving their businesses there. And if you're moving them further away into the suburbs where it's closer for white people to get to work, right? And you're only hiring a limited number of black people for those positions, let's say the white collar positions, right? Then you've got the blue collar positions, which of course have white people, but also predominantly black people because for many reasons, right? And then they're very far from work. And even if they are an executive, right, which is very rare back then, right? But even if they are, again, this is not about necessarily them being poor, right? But it is the conditions, it is the systems keeps them very far from getting to where they need to go for work. Public transportation is very difficult. Transportation systems are designed around the suburbs, around YT people. Like, it cuts so deep. Participation in labor unions. So there's just a lot of, and the busing. This was a major thing at the time, busing, right? Milliken v. Bradley, the case in Detroit, which undermined Brown v. Board of Education. So now you've got people people are losing faith in the institutions. Watergate really rocked everybody. They watched the whole thing, all the hearings every day on TV. I mean, it wasn't like there was that much on to watch. It's not like now, Back then it wasn't just must-see TV. It was on TV. That was it. That's all there was every single day. So people got wrapped up in it, and they wanted something done about it. So they passed this this FICA and the campaign finance reform, but they already knew it was a major blow to them, but they knew how they were going to try to get around it. And so they did. Because that's the whole point about the Civil Rights Act, about the Fair Housing Act. Look, it's not like outright bigoted YT supremacists woke up the next day and were like, yippee. But I'm telling you, it's also not like even liberals at the time, right? They were just as much a part of the problem of segregated suburbs and failing cities and opportunity hoarding and resource hoarding and poor distribution of public education funding. Never mind the fact that it's based on a faulty system, which is terrible. But even when money is budgeted already, a black-dominated school district has only, they get typically 65 to 75% of the funds that have already been budgeted to them, right? YT-dominated school districts get considerably more, usually upwards of 85 to 90% of what they're budgeted. So you have a budget, but then somebody has to dispense that money to you. Somebody has to distribute that money. Who has the power of the purse? What reasons have they come up with not to give you this particular money? It's the problem with the New Deal. The reason why the New Deal didn't get passed was because the South, those Southern Democrats, the newly formed Southern Bloc said, we're not going to pass these reforms unless we have the power of the purse. And you have to exclude farm workers and home workers because we ain't giving them anything. So whoever does get it, we're going to control how they get it. And oh, by the way, you have to eliminate all these people who happen to be black from the benefits therein. So when you talk about going back in the past, this is not so far. This was 50, 60 years ago, right? Master plan is about the Powell Memo. Powell Memorandum, which was this document and written by Lewis Powell, and it was the granddaddy of Project 2025. So when you go back a few generations, you realize these are not so far off. What did the New Deal do to all of those boomers' parents, right, who were coming back from the war? I mean, Social Security Act in 1934, black people didn't even get Social Security benefits for a couple of decades, right? How about even getting a full-time job that would have benefits where some of that would get paid in, right? That's another consideration. So when you deny the benefits of the New Deal, right, and you come up with a system that is really affirmative action being white, untold history of racial inequality in 20th century America, Ira Katz-Nelson, when affirmative action was white. So imagine somebody, black GI, white GI, coming back from World War II, okay? Let's just say they walk into an office to pick up their benefits. They both walk up to the counter. The woman behind the counter is very nice. And let's say she's got a bag full of the stuff, right? That is all that person's benefits. And she takes out a big bag and satchel and she puts it on. She takes out of the satchel. She goes, oh, this is great. This is a big chunk of money for your education. And, and this is great. We got you a mortgage. So that's basically cash in your pocket, just don't do anything stupid on the job. And we've got your governmental, your federal benefits. And you're going to buy a house and that house is going to appreciate over the next, 20 years and or 10 years, 15 years, 5 years, you could probably be in a different house, a bigger house by then. And, and who knew it would be the greatest, wealth accumulation period in the history of our country. And then, but of course, she pulls out this little plastic bag for the black GI who's come back, because there's nothing, he gets none of that. He gets none of that, right? So this is not about feeling for that person. I mean, this is about what we do, right? What we do in establishing these systems, then we deny the advantages that we have or how we got them. So, this is the kind of thing where, like, a lot of us haven't had to care about the master planners. It didn't affect us personally, or we didn't know how it was affecting us personally, right? But what's happening now, Project 2025, has very deep roots in what we have been doing as YT people, okay? And so much of this court packing that they have been doing, this court structuring over the last 20 years, last 50 years, but especially, the Roberts Court, just in the last 20, and Thomas, it is a culmination of a long strategic process, and they have no problem playing the long game. They got no problem doing it. They play the long game, and Powell mentions it in here, So I was getting a little self-conscious about following that whole thread, but like, if you take those two GIs and you follow their lives, and I've done this many times on some lives, and you track their lives, okay, the trajectory of their lives, things that you can, like, extrapolate pretty accurately about their lives. And you'd be surprised, because I give equal economic status. Like, I present the same scenario regardless of the black GI's economic status. I don't assume, in other words, that he or she he or his wife, if he's a black GI, right, chances are back then weren't as many black female GIs. Although, by the way, I would love to know who they were. And I know there were. That'd be interesting if I bet somebody's going to tell me there's a book about black female GIs in World War II. That would be, anyway. But the point is, right, I'm not assuming that he's rich or poor. Even if he, became a doctor, became a lawyer, whatever it is, engineer, like all the smarty money stuff, money jobs, right? Or if he's just hanging on because the only job he could get was where it was month to month, or it's working with his hands, or he's independent, or whatever, right? No assumptions. But either way, there are so many factors that are going to affect him, right? As you move through the space, these time periods, and you see who was in office at the time. And part of the story is, like, not just what they do. Like, for example, the white guy buys the house and has the mortgage, right? The black man does not have the mortgage because he can't get a mortgage, and so he ends up buying his house on contract. So that's an example that I use, right? And the fact that in any moment, and he doesn't build any equity in his home, and so that could be over a 30-year period, right? If you look at, like, 1945 to 1980, okay, let's say he's 25 when he gets out right at the end of World War II. Let's say he's 25. So he was born in 1920. And now he's 60 years old in 1980. His kid is grown, right, in his early to mid-30s, maybe late 30s, depending. How has their money flowed, right? Is it primarily flowing upwards or downwards, right? Vertically, intergenerationally. Well, there's a whole bunch of factors involved with that too, including the very beginning. Anyway, so you get the point. So, like, this stuff with master plan, like, a lot of this conservative backlash is stripping away so much of what we thought we were gaining when we passed the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act, except, again, it talks about loopholes in this, right? Well, there were loopholes in the Civil Rights Act. I guarantee you, if you really look at how, and I haven't really read I've seen it in the LBJ biography by Robert Caro, but I haven't read, like, a definitive history of just, like, that period, like the passage of the Civil Rights Act, like, that really gets into, like, the legalese, which would probably be tough. But I guarantee you, right, that there were, and some of you could probably name some of the trade-offs because you may already know them, but I can't name any off the top of my head, right? But just like little compromises that ended up having like a huge impact. So then when you get to the 80s and Ronald Reagan, and now he's trying to strip away voting rights, and then John Roberts, who was William Rehnquist's clerk, John Roberts is just like, well, you got all the time in the world. So what happens? 30 years later is Shelby v. Holder, 2013. Have you seen the 6,888th movie? No. My dad served active duty Army 5,070. Oh, Jamie, that's awesome. Yay. No, I don't know that movie. Oh, whoops. Did I send something to somebody? I didn't mean to. Whoa, what did I do? Oh. Hey.
Probably an accident.
What's up? It's all good. What's going on? Hello, friend.
The movie, it's called The 6888. It was about the all-black female battalion in World War II.
There you go.
And they were tasked with delivering all the backlogged mail to the GIs.
Wow. Was that recent, that movie?
Yes.
Okay, who's in that?
Kerry Washington.
Okay, is Taraji in that too?
I think she is too,
Yes,
yes.
okay. I have heard of that movie. Yep, and I have to see it. And I didn't see it and I wanted to. So thank you. Good reviews. I love it. Well, I love her. And yeah, I just saw Straw. Oh my God, that was yeah.
So, but I since you were talking about women in the World War.
Yeah.
I think that'd be worth looking into.
Amazing. Oh, and I have to find the book too. I'm sure there's a book on it. So that's great. Yeah, as I was saying it, I'm like, of course there's got to be something out there. I mean, I have a gallery of 700 book covers and everything. So thank you. No, but that's the thing. You learn shit every single day. It's awesome. There's always something else. All right, do it. All right, see ya. So I think like when we think about, 13th is great too. When we think about how to tie this in through the decades, it's really important to know that like this was like yesterday, okay? And the way that they have concurrently built this court based on loosening all this campaign finance money, right? These restrictions. And then as they're building the court, they're poking away, right? They're just picking away, they're chipping away at all of these different supposed, laws that we had on the books that suddenly don't really look like those anymore. I will. So it's like, yeah, I mean, the Voting Rights Act just, and I'll tell you, Mediva Denny does such a great job of talking about it in The Originalism Trap, how extremists stole the Constitution and how we, the people, can take it back. She is fantastic. Mediva Denny, The Originalism Trap. And also, as I mentioned earlier, I just didn't show it to you, Worse Than Nothing, The Dangerous Fallacy of Originalism, Erwin Chemerinsky. I will warn you right now, he is a Zionist, but he is brilliant, and that does not obviously affect his legal work, his legal mind, because he's been very much on the right side of that. So hopefully, maybe sometime we can get him to understand that the very things that well, I guess he's looking at him from more of a legal standpoint, but whatever. Anyway, Schumer, yeah. Ugh. Oh, yeah, well, that whole thing. Well, look, and this is why, okay, so remember I told you the story. I'm going to say something a little unpopular right now, but it's fine. I stand by what I say, and there's nothing like, it's not really controversial, but just pay attention to the exact words that I'm using. Ruth Bader Ginsburg fucked up. And I say that because she, of course, had every right. Of course, she had the right. She could stay on, whatever. as long as she wants. But that story that I told you about Abe Fortas, right? That, again, you can read about in Supreme Inequality, the Supreme Court's 50-year battle for a more unjust America. Okay? It's not like Ruth Bader Ginsburg did not know the story of Abe Fortas. Okay? First of all, they're both Jewish. So I'm sure she has a certain knowledge of, the Jewish Supreme Court justices and the history of that. She had to have known. It was only in the previous 20 years that Fortas was forced off the court, right, by a right-wing, by a conservative movement and a president who, Nixon's, I have to think, I cannot remember the other, what? Yeah, Richard Nixon, Supreme Court nominees. Warren Burger. Oh, my God. So Earl Warren leaves and Warren Burger takes over for Earl Warren. Warren Burger was a big-time conservative. So you're getting Earl Warren to leave, and he was the most liberal Chief Justice we've ever had. He's the only one that ever that ever really got anything done for Black Americans and civil rights. And then he got Harry Blackmun, Lewis Powell, and William Rehnquist. And Rehnquist's top clerk was John Roberts. And then John Roberts, 30 years later, chipped away at the Voting Rights Act in Shelby v. Holder. So the point is that this is all very connected. And you cannot look at what happened 80, 90 years ago with the New Deal and coming out of World War II and the GI Bill, how that set white America and Black America on such divergent paths. After what was considered the nadir, the low point of what people would call race relations in this country. That's what people do. That's what I had to learn. And it's like, what? And I heard Lowen say it, and he describes it brilliantly in Sundown Towns. It's not, this is another case where, like, you kind of know the buzzword, you know what a sundown town is, but you don't know about sundown towns until you, and not just how awful they are, of course, on the surface, and I'm not trying not to be goofy there, but because the overall impact that they've had is so deep. It is so deep that it's something that, like, you won't even be able to fathom it until you dig into something like this. So audio is great for this, by the way. The audio reader is really good. I try to do audio for a lot of my nonfiction, but yeah. So he talks a lot about that in this. But there are these divergent paths, and we have to recognize those. And the Civil Rights Act was not this glorious achievement, you know? First of all, the first Civil Rights Act was in, 1873? It's like we just don't want to get it right. And so we find all these loopholes. And this is exactly what these guys were doing. They said, our entire way of life is at risk. And part of that is these crazies on the left, and not to mention those black people, not to mention those Panthers, which of course they weren't being so nice. So this cuts right to the core of who they are as people, who they are as a movement. And this is why, all right, anyway, I'm going to continue. Screw it. I'm going to keep going here, I think. And let's maybe try to, get some more people in here. We'll see. Now we're going to learn about Lewis Powell, by the way. This is all right. A couple more thoughts here. We are at the precipice right now of a kind of disastrous place. Now, Sacred, you were saying earlier, this gives you anxiety, right? I don't know if you're still here, and I was about to stop because I did call your name. And then I just thought, all right, we'll just do this later. But in a way, after I saw this, I kind of, after I got through this, I realized that it wasn't as depressing as I thought it was, even though all along the way, I felt just like you do. This like pit of despair where it's like, and as this keeps going, you're going to be like, oh my God. Because it's not good. It's so much worse than we know. I think this sheds a lot of light on that. But also, you realize at the end, oh, okay, but it is a systemic thing, and even the people who want to change it can't. And I know what you're probably thinking. There's a lot of lag on my camera right now. I hope that's not something weird's going on. On the one hand, that's kind of depressing. But on the other hand, I've found a little comfort in it. Knowing that in a certain way, it's like, oh, there's literally nothing I can do about that. But what's our loophole? I don't know if there is one at this point. Well, I kind of do. I sort of feel like let's make them work for it more. Let's make them use that money, no matter how much it is, and have to spread it around and exhaust it in as many places as possible. That's what it is. It just hit me how it's connected to the National Popular Vote Compact. And that's it. Because with the National Popular Vote Compact, they have to spread their money around even more. And I can actually play you the video from that. Or we could do episode 3 of the Powell Memo. But I would be tempted to just play you this 9-minute video. I'm going to do it. What do you think? I'm doing it. National Popular Vote. Agreement among the states to elect the president by national popular vote. Yeah, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. Like and share. Let's get this up a little bit. I'm going to show it on, I want to be on while we're watching so the TikTok doesn't take it as like I'm, so I can't green screen it, but I can turn my lerp-a-terp. And let's see, maybe I can do it like, yes, National Popular Vote Compact. Hold on. Oh no, I didn't want to do the whole thing. Hold on. Everyone on the 40, yes, do something. I'm kidding. All right. Here, video. Oh my God. This is so annoying. Oh wait, I got it. I forgot I set up my mouse. Okay. Nope. Just go there. Okay. Videos. And okay. Here we go. I'm not going to mirror the video, and I'm going to stand behind this and talk. Because that's how I roll. Oh, I think this is going to work. Okay, here we go.
Former presidential candidate Scott Walker summed up our current system of electing the president by saying,
Nation as a whole is not going to elect the next president. 12 states are.
Governor Mitt Romney said,
and so all the money will get spent in 10 states.
This video explains why more than 3/4 of the people of the United States are politically irrelevant in general election campaigns for president, and how that can be changed in order to make every voter in every state relevant in every presidential election. The National Popular Vote Bill would guarantee the presidency to the candidate receiving the most popular votes in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. The President of the United States is elected by 538 presidential electors. The Constitution lets each state choose the method of selecting its electors. Today, 48 states used the so-called winner-take-all law that awards all of a state's presidential electors to the candidate who gets the most popular votes inside each separate state. For example, because Obama received 1.5 million votes in Minnesota and Romney got only 1.3 million, all 10 of Minnesota's electoral votes for president were cast by Democratic electors.
Because of state winner-take-all laws, 5 of our 46 presidents have come into office without receiving the most popular votes nationwide. This occurs when a candidate wins a couple of states by a small margin while losing the rest of the country by a large margin. For example, in 2016, President Trump won Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania by a total of 78,000 votes, thereby winning a majority in the Electoral College while losing the country by 2.8 million votes. Each of these 78,000 voters was 36 times more important than the 2.8 million voters elsewhere. Similarly, 537 voters in Florida in 2000 were 1,000 times more important than 537,000 voters elsewhere in the country. Near misses are common under the current system. A shift of 60,000 votes in Ohio in 2004 would have elected the second-place candidate despite President George W. Bush's nationwide lead of 3 million votes. In 2020, if fewer than 22,000 voters had changed their minds in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin, Joe Biden would have lost in the Electoral College despite his lead of over 7 million votes elsewhere in the country. Each of these 22,000 or so voters was 329 times more important than the 7 million other voters. Because a few thousand votes in any one of a dozen closely divided battleground states can decide the presidency, the winner-take-all system creates unnecessary recounts, hair-splitting lawsuits, judges deciding elections, and reduced confidence in elections, even when the choice of the nation's 158 million voters is clear. Moreover, the outsized national impact of a few thousand votes in battleground states virtually invites foreign interference in our elections. In a nationwide vote for president, every vote will be equal throughout the country. State winner-take-all laws have other adverse effects.
Neither candidate has any reason to campaign in any state where he is safely ahead or hopelessly behind.
For example, the only states that received any general election campaign events in 2012 were the 12 states where Romney's support was in the narrow range between 45% and 51%. 38 states were ignored, including 12 of the 13 smallest states and almost all rural, agricultural, southern, western, and northeastern states.
23 reliably Republican states were totally ignored by both parties, as were 15 Democratic states in the District of Columbia.
In 2016, virtually all general election campaign events were in 12 closely divided states where Trump support was between 43% and 51%. Similarly, virtually all campaigning in 2020 was in the 12 states where Trump support was between 46% and 54%. Battleground status is fickle and fleeting, and voters in Michigan, Minnesota, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania were virtually ignored in 2012 because their states weren't particularly close that year.
The presidential battleground has been shrinking for decades. With Ohio, Florida, and Iowa seemingly off the map in 2024, the candidates may only campaign in 8 or fewer states, with 80% of the voters being little more than spectators.
But there's more at stake than whether babies don't get kissed in the states that get ignored.
In his book, Presidential Pork, Dr. John Hudak of the Brookings Institution documents how battleground states receive 7% more presidentially controlled grants.
Okay, hold on a second. So I just want to check in with you all, okay? Now just tell me, do you find this compelling so far? Obviously, you can't work through all of it right now. You probably have a lot of questions. You're already thinking things, like your natural biases are kicking in, like I had that too. Just so you know, there is a book that you can download for free via PDF. I have 2 copies of it, but I'm using them as like a bookshelf. But I have the electronic. It's called Every Vote Equal. And it is a tome. It's like 1,200 pages, 1,300, 1,400 pages, and it's big. and it has everything in all the myths, all the stuff that people say is like wrong about doing this, and right? Every vote equal. Yeah, it's so freaking cool. I know a couple people downloaded it. I mentioned it earlier today. But yeah, like it's really compelling. And wait till you see how they, yeah, there's just a lot more to it that's really super cool. Okay.
Twice as many disaster declarations.
All right, hold on. Let's go back to here. Here we
received 7% more presidentially controlled grants. Twice as many disaster declarations, and considerably more Superfund and No Child Left Behind exemptions. The Small Business Administration's largest loan in history was to a ricotta cheese factory, described by President Obama as, quote, the tastiest investment the government has ever made, unquote, located in, you guessed it, Ohio. Meanwhile, Professors Douglas Kreiner and Andrew Reeves show how the interests of battleground states shape innumerable government policies, including steel quotas. Even travel by sitting presidents and cabinet members is skewed to battleground states. Wow. Indeed, flyover states are so irrelevant that presidential candidates don't even bother polling them to see what issues might be of concern to their voters.
Do you know, when I took over as campaign manager in 2016, we did zero. Let me repeat the number, 0 national polls.
As a former White House press secretary said, quote, if people don't like it, they can move from a safe state to a swing state. Fortunately, thanks to the National Popular Vote Bill, people don't have to move to another state in order to make their vote count. Right. The cause of all these problems, namely the state-by-state, winner-take-all method of choosing presidential electors, is not in the Constitution. It was not debated at the Constitutional Convention, and was never mentioned in the Federalist Papers. Only 3 states used winner-take-all in our nation's first presidential election in 1789, and all 3 repealed it by 1800. Wow. It was not till 1880 that winner-take-all was adopted by all the states.
I wonder why.
These state winner-take-all laws can be repealed in the same way that they were originally enacted, namely by passing a different state law. In the leading case governing the selection of presidential...
By the way, 1880 was the election right after Rutherford B. Hayes was given the election, right, as the trade-off for ending Reconstruction. Yeah. I bet if you do a little bit digging...
electors, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that the choice of method belongs exclusively to the states.
As of April 2024, 17 states and the District of Columbia have enacted the National Popular Vote Bill into law, including 5 small states and D.C., 9 medium states, and 3 big states.
See?
Moreover, 1 legislative chamber has approved the bill in 7 other states, including a bipartisan 27-18 vote in the Republican-controlled Oklahoma Senate, and a bipartisan 37-21 vote in the Republican-controlled Arizona House. Over 3,700 state legislators have endorsed it. 65% of the public strongly supports it. "63% of moderate and liberal Republicans and 47% of all Republicans support it."
The National Popular Vote Law will take effect when identical laws are enacted by states possessing a majority of the Electoral College, that is 270 out of 538. After taking effect, every vote will be equal throughout the United States, thus making every voter in every state politically relevant in every presidential election. All of the presidential electors from the enacting states will be supporters of the candidate receiving the most popular votes in all 50 states and D.C., thereby guaranteeing the presidency to the candidate receiving the most popular votes nationwide.
In a nationwide election in which every vote is equal, candidates will have to pay attention to the concerns of voters in all 50 states.
Yep. The National Popular Vote Compact is a constitutionally conservative, state-based approach. It does not alter the Constitution and does not violate the Constitution. It retains the Electoral College and state control of elections. Additional videos discuss various specific aspects of the National Popular Vote Compact. Learn more at nationalpopularvote.com and from the book, Every Vote Equal.
There it is.
A state-based plan for electing the president by national popular vote, which can be read or downloaded for free or purchased from Amazon.
Please use our convenient email system to ask your state legislators to support the National Popular Vote Bill.
Now, they talk about, they do, I mean, every
The
single...
Tyler, Texas Morning Telegraph has said, quote, the strongest argument against national popular vote is that it would shift political battles to the big cities. In a popular election, rural areas would be skipped. This concern arises from the...
So he goes through a whole 7-minute thing on why that's not true. Myths about big states and big counties. Myths about constitutionality. What is needed? What is this? What is needed? Why it's needed? Myths about small states. Myths about small cities. They go through everything. It's amazing. I mean, it is so exhaustive. All the myth busting that they do. And it's really, really cool. So I'm happy to play another one of these. I'm going to keep it here, though, and I would just like move it. But anyway, so I think this is all connected, right? When you look at campaign finance, and we'll go back to the Powell memo. When you look at campaign finance, when you look at how the court has been structured, right? And we know now that this was an initiative started by Lewis Powell in his memo in 1971, and we're going to learn about him right now in episode 3 if people want to move forward. I'm going to move this because it's being annoying. Oh, I know why it's being annoying. Hold on. Because the iPad. Oh, man. Yes. Now this will connect so much easier. I think, kind of, not really. Yes, now. Hello, hello, hello. Campaign finance, right, is exactly how they stacked the courts, okay? And why do they stack the courts? Because they can, and they want to strip away any and all civil rights because they know that black and brown people are going to be in the majority. We're going to be a minority majority around 2050, 2045, 2048. So YT people are freaking out. Powerful white men are freaking the F out. That's why everything's happening with ICE. I mean, I know you know this. So they're going to have control of the courts for the next, 30 years, 40 years. And if we're not careful, a long time. So the question is, how do we potentially push to transform the court system somehow? Problem is we get so, myself included, we get so, yes, what's the question, Edith? Yeah. Hey, Kay. We get very caught up in the day-to-day. And again, as I said earlier, I, as a cis-het white man, I am probably better served trying to rally a group around, I don't know, maybe tell me if I'm wrong, but rally a group of people around these things that are not as sexy, but can be really high impact because the day-to-day things like ICE, I'm not being, I mean, I guess I could if they found my anti-Zionist, my anti-Israel posts, they would absolutely want to put me in a van and send me somewhere. But at the moment, I don't have to deal with that, right? And so my thing is where am I best utilized? I think it's educating and communicating and reading, and then all this also leaning into the privileged part of me that can focus on what's to come, because there has to be a group of us who are looking ahead. Right? And that's usually, I would say, reserved for the people that don't have to deal with it as much in the here and now, if that makes sense. So I feel like those few things can be, and I've been thinking about them for a while, but I wrote them down somewhere. Yeah, I mean, Jewishness and whiteness certainly has been a big thing. Anti-racist education, books, right? So then national popular vote, campaign finance, and I think the fifth thing is textbooks. Nobody wants to talk about it. I mean, we want to talk about it. We say, we look, but who's doing that? I got to find those people because I don't want it to get even more whitewashed. I don't want it to get worse than what it is. And build our own replacement systems. Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's why I'm thinking, is there any way to undo the big horrific bill? Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, and I'm already wondering, what parts of the infrastructure bill that Biden passed, like who holds the purse strings? That's something I was going to ask a while ago when I was talking about the New Deal. I was trying to bring it up to date. But, who holds the purse strings on that? This big, beautiful bill is so much worse. I think the consequences of it are going to be so bad because first and foremost, because I want to talk about the courts. You're right. But that's going to take, again, that takes a focused, concerted effort. It's not sexy, right? It's not sexy. It may require not being on a TikTok live that you want to hang out on for a few hours. I'm not even referring to that. I'll be particular because I know there's a lot of Danikins here, and of course I love it. Absolutely. I'm just saying, generally speaking, there's going to be a sacrifice, right? In not getting, and I'm talking to myself too, not getting distracted by, the bright light, the thing that's, the sexy thing that's dangling before you on social media. Because it's put me in a dark place, Are you a reformist or an abolitionist? I would have to say I'm an abolitionist. I mean, I don't think we should have police in its current form at all, for example. I think we should call the case law that has undermined so much of the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act and the shiny object, thank you. We need to call it what it is. It is a systematic stripping away of basic civil rights that we obviously were never that serious about granting to everyone because we've tried it 3 times and we failed every time. I mean, you could argue we've tried 4 or 5 times. Not like we failed, it was by design. But I mean, the failure to pass something substantial that was going to stick. And when you vest so much power in a 7-person court body, it is so easy with very bright people who know how to argue in just the right way. And that's what John Roberts and Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas and, but that's what Thurgood Marshall and Ketanji Brown Jackson and I'm sorry, did I just butcher her name? No, it's Brown Jackson, right? And obviously Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan and John Harlan and Harry Blackmun and William Rehnquist. But that's all the great ones, Scalia, Thomas. I mean, that's what they do, right? That's what they do. And it's a question of, these 7 people who agrees with them. And I'll tell you, the reason why I say another 30, 40 years is because I think it's going to be James Ho. I think Trump would love nothing better than to be the guy that says, I'm going to get look at me, I nominated and got the first Asian American Supreme Court justice. And he's Taiwanese. He's on the 5th Circuit, appointed in 2018 by Trump. Only Asian American judge on the 5th Circuit, and the only judge to be an immigrant. And he is a mega right-winger. This guy is going to be our next Supreme Court justice. And there is very little we can do about it. Oh my God, look at this. His father was a doctor who specializes in obstetrics and gynecology. The Taiwanese American family immigrated to the United States when Ho was a child, moving first to Long Island before settling in San Marino, which is right over there. I'm from Long Island, New York, and I live 15, 20 minutes from Pasadena. He was educated at the Polytechnic School, a rigorous private school in Pasadena, where he became the editor-in-chief of the school newspaper, The Paw Print. He was a high school classmate of Leandra Kruger, who later became a judge of the Supreme Court of California. She's an associate justice of the Supreme Court. Oh, wow. He volunteered as an actor and dancer for school plays and briefly served as a football lineman. Well, this guy's interesting. A classmate... No, I hate him. A classmate described Ho as super intense, walked fast, laid out pages fast, and drove too fast in a Ford Probe. Okay, I walked very fast as well. After high school, he studied public policy at Stanford, where he wrote for the Stanford Daily and graduated in 1995 with a Bachelor of Arts with honors. From 95 to 96, he was a Cal Senate Fellow at Cal State University, Sacramento, yada, 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 yada. Served as the executive director of the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy. Well, University of Chicago Law School. After graduating, he was a law clerk to Jerry Edwin Smith in the Fifth Circuit. Yada, yada, yada. Ted Olson. He was chief counsel to subcommittees of the Senate Judiciary Committee under John Cornyn. Ugh. From 05 to 06, he was a law clerk for Clarence motherfucking Thomas. He then returned to private practice at Gibson Dunn in its Dallas office from 06 to 08. Solicitor General of Texas, replacing Ted Cruz, and he led the state's lawsuits against the Obama administration as a Texas lawyer. So he's very involved with, what's his face? Who's the attorney general now? That pig. Paxton? Yeah. I would almost guarantee you, and he clerked for Thomas. I'm going to bet $50 that it will be Alito before the midterms. Thomas goes before the midterms, and he nominates Ho. And then before he leaves office, Alito will step down, and he will nominate a second. Yep. Hawley stated in June 2024 he believes Ho has done a terrific job on the 5th, and that Ho is principled and will be immune to the greenhouse effect. Senator Ted Cruz. Yeah, on September 9th, 2020, Trump included Ho on a list of potential nominees. Instead, he went with Barrett. Ho was named to a short list of presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. He delivered a speech at a Federalist Society conference in Kentucky, said he would no longer hire law clerks from Yale Law School, which he said was plagued by cancel culture and students disrupting conservative speakers. Ho said Yale, quote, not only tolerates the cancellation of views, it actively practices it. And he urged other judges to likewise boycott the school. U.S. Circuit Court Judge Elizabeth Branch of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit confirmed her participation in the Yale boycott in a statement to National Review. Wow. Where she backed Ho by saying he raised legitimate concerns about the lack of free speech on law school campuses, Yale in particular. So this, by the way, this is where it all started with the Powell memo. I'm telling you. Oh, you know what? This is a perfect opportunity to jump right back in. So we're going to do it. There's a lot. Oh, here we go. On April 18th, 2018, in his first written opinion as a Fifth Circuit judge, Ho dissented from a denial of a rehearing en banc in a case regarding a limit on campaign contributions. The Fifth Circuit three-judge panel upheld the constitutionality of a City of Austin ordinance setting an individual campaign contribution limit of $350. So they upheld the constitutionality of that. In his dissent, so they rejected the plaintiff's claim that the limit violated the First Amendment. In his dissent, Ho argued that the court should have granted hearing en banc and held that the Austin contribution limit violates the First Amendment. So yeah, so there it is. So now we've got, oh no, I thought it would be, I thought he was going to say about the other case. Doesn't matter. Americans for Progress. All right. I'm not really into the court stuff, but you're so, oh, thank you. All right. So here we go. And that's the thing. Like, I think we have to kind of we have to find a way. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for getting me over 100,000. Oh my God. You guys, everybody rocks here. Thank you. I think we need to find a way to get a little bit excited about the Supreme Court. Not in like, oh my God, I love these people. But I think it's really important. Because then I think we'll have a better, if we can kind of get into it a little bit, then we can maybe then understand like who's coming up through the circuit courts, because those are the people that become the justices later on. I mean, if you think about it now, like who are the clerks that are clerking now for all these justices? Those are the people. I know you're trying. And I love you for it, Amy. Thank you. But it's like, who are the clerks that are clerking for the justice? I mean, yeah, we don't have all day to track this, right? I'm certainly not independently wealthy enough that I'm retiring and doing this all day. But it is a nice way to spend a Wednesday, isn't it? All right, here we go.
A vinyl record that almost no one has heard in the last 50 years.
Wait, hold on.
Lewis F. Powell Jr. began the...
I'm going to play you a recording. It's something of an artifact, a vinyl record that almost no one has heard in the last 50 years.
Ooh. Lewis F. Powell Jr. began the practice of law in Virginia in the year 1932. His intellect, his dedication, and his great qualities as a human being became widely known and appreciated by his peers.
That's the iconic voice of Walter Cronkite, the CBS News anchor who you've heard in previous episodes delivering reports on the Watergate scandal.
All right,
64th year, he could look back upon a distinguished career equaled by very few.
In addition to his anchor gig, Cronkite in the mid-20th century hosted a popular radio and TV program called You Are There. It used fictional reenactments to teach the audience about historical events and figures, presenting them as if they were being covered live.
Great change took place in the life of Lewis Powell on October 21st, 1971. All things are as they were then, except you are there.
Prior episode topics included the Battle of Gettysburg and the Boston Tea Party. For this one, Cronkite focused on a different monumental event.
On December 6, 1971, the Senate confirmed the nomination of Lewis F. Powell Jr. to the Supreme Court of the United States.
But this edition of You Are There was never broadcast. It was never intended to be heard by anyone outside of 100 or so attendees gathered for the annual Christmas luncheon for Philip Morris Incorporated. You might recall Philip Morris as the tobacco giant behind dozens of cigarette brands, including Marlboro and Virginia Slims. The event at the swanky 21 Club in Midtown Manhattan brought together corporate executives, board members, and shareholders to celebrate Lewis Powell and his confirmation to the United States Supreme Court. In his opening remarks, Philip Morris's longtime chairman and CEO, Joseph Coleman, declared Powell's Supreme Court appointment, quote, without question, the greatest single honor ever bestowed upon anyone connected with Philip Morris. For this smoke-filled celebration, money was no object. The 20-minute spoof of You Are There included the real-life Walter Cronkite, often cited as the most trusted man in America. He was there in person at the event with a cast of actors performing scripted skits recounting key moments in Lewis Powell's life and career. It starts with him growing up in Richmond, Virginia.
Mr. Powell! Mr. Powell! I just come from your house. Congratulations. Your wife just gave birth to a baby boy.
Well, that's really good news.
Then the program spotlights Powell being asked by President Nixon to fill a Supreme Court seat.
We will now continue our committee hearings on Mr. Lewis Powell's nomination.
So why was Powell being celebrated by Philip Morris? Because when he was nominated, he was on the boards of several major companies, including, wait for it, yes, Philip Morris. In fact, he'd been crucial in helping the cigarette maker navigate the growing legal and regulatory scrutiny over public health concerns about smoking. And now Philip Morris's own guy, Lewis Powell, was going to be on the Supreme Court. The live show in Manhattan concluded, I shit you not, with the head of Philip Morris presenting Lewis Powell with a black Supreme Court justice robe, emblazoned with giant logos for Marlboro cigarettes and other Philip Morris brands, just like a NASCAR driver.
Philip Morris!
It almost seems too hard to believe, but we found pictures of the robe to prove it. There's a link in our show notes. Obviously, this was a pretty strange event, and the robe was likely a gag gift. But still, the following day, Powell wrote a heartfelt thank you letter to Coleman for the gifts to him and his wife, which also included a...
All right, if you're just joining, we're doing Master Plan. We're on episode 3. We started with episode 1 today. It is about the Powell Memo. The current episode is episode 3, the Powell Memo itself. But it's a 10-episode series from David Sirota and The Lever. It's an amazing podcast. It's all about campaign finance reform, the journey from 1971 to Project 2025 here in 2025. It's not necessarily, it's more like the basis for the, it ends up telling that story, but it is the basis for campaign finance reform and so much of what we've been talking about for the last little while. So if you're just here, awesome. If you've been here for a while, you're probably like, just shut up and hit play. Are we into this one so far? What do we think? Wait till you hear Lewis Black read the memo. It's great. All right, here we go.
A crystal sculpture and a watch. But, Powell wrote, quote, sentimentally, I think we like the Philip Morris robe best of all. Philip Morris was rejoicing because Powell was one of their own, a distinguished member of the political and business gentry ascending to the nation's highest court. But there was another, more covert reason for the corporate elite's glee. Earlier that year, Lewis Powell had written a confidential memo that was the founding document of the entire master plan. Maybe you've heard of it.
This master plan that was set out in the Lewis Powell memo, and I'd advise you to go and look it up.
We did look it up. In this episode, we're going to turn our gaze away from Congress and the presidency toward another set of characters operating deep in the background, catalyzing a highly organized underground effort to build an entirely new political coalition, one that legalized corruption in order to cement the political power of big business. I'm David Sirota, and this is Master Plan. When we first started looking into the story of how corruption was legalized in America, I knew we'd be looking at key Supreme Court rulings and the Watergate scandal. But there was also this one name that kept showing up everywhere. Lewis F. Powell.
Yes.
He's not exactly a household name.
No.
Don't feel bad if you don't know much about him. Lewis Powell sat on the Supreme Court in the 1970s and 80s. He was appointed by Richard Nixon, but he had a reputation as this moderate, chill dude who everyone got along with. Here he is after being overwhelmingly confirmed by the U.S. Senate in 1971.
I am, of course, gratified by the Senate's action, and particularly by the generous margin of the approval. But the near unanimity of support does frighten me a little. I am too conscious of my own limitations to take it at face value.
You can see why people described Powell as a mixture of aw-shucks humility and witty grace. It's also why he was uniformly liked. His friends, family, and biographers used words like calm, affable, sensible, self-effacing. In a 1978 documentary, here's how Powell described his early years on the court, when he wanted to earn his place among the veteran justices.
The justice that's the youngest in seniority is the doorkeeper. I was the highest paid doorkeeper in the world for 5 years.
When Powell finally hung up his robe in 1987, the liberal crowd applauded him for being a centrist. Here's Democratic Congresswoman Pat Schroeder.
I think everybody is very disappointed because Justice Powell was a great moderating influence, and he was not running around with an ideological bit in his mouth.
Here's the ACLU.
We see the replacement of Justice Powell to be a very critical appointment to the court, and we hope that Congress and the President will treat this as a very critical appointment and maintain the balance that the court now demonstrates.
Here are the Ivy League law professors.
He was a moderate. His moderation was both his virtue and his vice to practicing lawyers and court watchers.
And here are the journalists.
And this is a person of the most enormous gentility and gentleness. I can't imagine him ever saying a harsh word to anyone. And you can't help but have enormous affection for him.
But here's the thing. If you dig deeper into Lewis Powell's life, you find something much different than these descriptions. You find one of the original master planners meticulously outlining a blueprint for the corporate takeover of America. This wasn't a moderate milquetoast guy. This was an angry man writing an angry screed that became one of the major viral manifestos of the late 20th century.
Of all time. Okay, listen. Folks, I have to tell you, one thing I've learned is that I, as much as anyone else, succumb to my own biases all the time, my own emotional biases, right? How many times you just get a good feeling about somebody? I just get a good feeling. I just feel good. They just make me cozy. And then, like, you peel back the onion, you're like, oh my God, that person's like so entirely like a total scumbag. Like an awful, 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 horrific, or this is their true ideology. This is what they really feel. This is what they really think. And it's because we don't want to believe what people are showing us, right? Now, with politicians, it can be a little bit dicey because they're part of a really shitty system, right? But people show you who they are. And the way that they think may not necessarily be like the way that they vote. It's like my brain finishes sentences all the time. Yeah, right, yeah. Once you get more attuned to it, you realize it like as it's happening. Like me earlier with the thing about the black female platoon from World War II. It's not that I didn't think they existed. I mean, but I was kind of catching myself in the moment. Like there was like a little bit of a blip where I guess maybe it's not the best example, but yeah, like I was kind of like, there was a little bit of doubt, right? Or like, well, how many were there? I don't know. Maybe there were like 2, maybe there was 1. I don't know. Were any women even, like, were they all working here? Were they out? That kind of thing. But I was catching myself as it was happening, like thinking of, oh yeah, there's probably a movie, there's probably a book. And of course, sure enough, there is a movie and it's recent. So you never know. It also could have been in the recesses of my brain, but I succumb to this all the time, right? But let's take it into the political realm. Let's leave it there because that's where we are. There are certainly people who I've liked over the years, but when you really look at their policy, it's like it's the complete opposite. And these are like decision maker people like John Kasich, right? Like rabid anti-ableist, but people were just like raving about John Kasich, and then there were people from Ohio, lefties from Ohio. It's like, yeah, no, not JK. No, he's not a good person, but we get attracted to people for all different reasons. Anyway, that's it. I don't know why I even stopped it.
This manifesto came to be known.
I think I need it to like keep the, but yeah, right? See? Amy, you get me. You get me. All right.
Known as the Powell Memo.
The now infamous Powell Memo.
The Powell Memo.
The Powell Memo.
The Powell Memorandum.
Every so often it gets mentioned to contextualize what's happening today. For instance, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has given a series of floor speeches on its impact.
The secret report may well have been the single most consequential piece of writing that Lewis Powell ever did in a long career of consequential writing.
Whitehouse methodically connected the Powell Memo to the right-wing takeover of the Supreme Court.
Mr. President, the effort to capture the court has likely been the most effectual deployment of right-wing and corporate resources into our common American political life.
And yet, despite how influential and significant the memo was, and how much it still defines American politics today, it remains omitted from the official history of the country.
Can you believe it?
And in the rare instance that it gets a mention in the media, it almost sounds fake, like some boogeyman manufactured by liberals desperate to come up with an explanation for their loss of power.
Are you familiar with the Lewis Powell Memorandum?
No. He's a fellow who ended up in the Supreme Court. He wrote a memorandum to the National Chambers of Commerce in which he said, there's too much democracy, and it's a threat to capitalism.
Who's that? Anybody? Anybody know who that was? He's very old, but you all know him.
That's Dick Van Dyke.
That's Dick Van
And he
Dyke.
might sound like he's exaggerating, but he's not. And yet the Powell memo seems to have been scrubbed out of America's memory.
Okay, here's what I don't understand, David.
That's master plan producer Jared Jakang.
Here, I'm going to play you what Dick Van Dyke said. Again.
It remains omitted from the official history of the country. And in the rare instance that it gets a mention in the media, it almost sounds fake, like some boogeyman manufactured by liberals desperate to come up with an explanation for their loss of power.
But it's not.
Are you familiar with the Lewis Powell memorandum?
It's Dick Van Dyke.
No. He's a fellow who ended up in the Supreme Court. He wrote a memorandum to the National Chambers of Commerce in which he said, there's too much democracy, and it's a threat to capitalism.
That's Dick Van Dyke, and he might sound like he's exaggerating, but he's not. And yet the Powell memo seems to have been scrubbed out of America's memory.
Okay, here's what I don't understand, David.
That's master plan producer Jared Jakang Mayer, who spent the last 2 years...
I am so glad that I'm dragging y'all with me on this, because this is the most phenomenal podcast. I'm telling you, I've gotten so much out of this, and this is like now the 4th time I'm listening to this particular episode, because I played it a couple of times.
Digging deep into Lewis Powell.
I read the entire official biography of Lewis F. Powell. It's like 700 pages long.
Yeah, sure.
It was written by a
Comment
legal
away.
scholar
Yes.
who was once one of Powell's clerks
I
at
would
the
love to hear
Supreme
some
Court,
comments. Hey, Sandy.
and it does not mention...
Here, sorry, hold on. Yes, absolutely. Some commenting would be great, and of course me interacting. Yup, 100%. 100%. So I hope you're all enjoying this. This is great. It's good stuff. Good afternoon. We're talking about the Powell memo. We're on episode 3 of Master Plan. And thank you. Ayo. And so what's happened so far? Let's catch Sandy up on everything that's happened in the first 2 episodes of the podcast. Yeah, because it's all about you, Sand. All right.
Who spent the last 2 years digging deep into Lewis Powell.
I read the entire official biography of Lewis F. Powell. It's like 700 pages long. It was written by a legal scholar who was once one of Powell's clerks at the Supreme
700
Court,
pages.
and it does not mention the memo once.
Doesn't mention it once.
As a justice, Powell cast important votes on some very key cases. Abortion.
Just, again, this guy who knew him well wrote a 700-page biography of Lewis Powell and did not mention this memo once. The first time I saw it was in this book, Tailspin, The People and Forces Behind America's 50-Year Fall and Those Fighting to Reverse It by Stephen Brill. He also wrote America's Bitter Pill about the healthcare system. But let me just show you here, because I remember hearing it, and I never went back and looked where in this book it was, but I know this is the first time I had heard of it. So hold on one second. Peters, political, Powell, watch, it won't even be here. Nope, there it is. Lewis Powell Jr., 199 to 102. Yep. Moat Nation. Yeah, and he gets into Powell and the memo here, which I'm going to bookmark for myself. But anyway, right? 700 pages, never mentioned once. Okay, here we go.
School prayer, the death penalty.
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action was probably the biggest one, where he was the 5th vote to allow it. These were the big social issues of the...
Okay, hold on. So he's talking about Powell right now. Hold on, let's go back a little bit.
Okay, here's what I don't understand, David.
That's master plan producer Jared Jakang Mayer, who spent the last 2 years digging deep into Lewis Powell.
I read the entire official biography of Lewis F. Powell. It's like 700 pages long. It was written by a legal scholar who was once one of Powell's clerks at the Supreme Court, and it does not mention the memo once. As a justice, Powell cast important votes on some very key cases. Abortion, school prayer, the death penalty.
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action was probably the biggest one, where he was the 5th vote to allow it. These were the big social issues of the 80s and 90s, and he was seen as a swing vote or a moderate.
I think Lewis Powell has never been a man with a mission, as it were, or an agenda.
Justice Powell has been a healer on the court.
But meanwhile, in cases dealing with the rights of corporations and about campaign finance laws, Powell took positions that weren't so moderate. And the long-term effects of those court decisions on the economy and the environment, for example, didn't become obvious until decades later.
And so they've kind of flown under the radar.
Yeah, and a lot of crazy stuff was going on in the early 1970s. And that's probably part of the reason why this memo, which he wrote only a few months before getting on the court, never really caught the public's attention. Powell never spoke publicly about it. He later said that it was something that he'd written up in his free time in 1971, basically as a favor to an old friend. And he told people that he sent the memo off to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and nothing much came of it. End of story.
So what exactly was the memo? Well, we'll get to that. And we've got a little surprise for listeners. Later on, we've got another famous Lewis who's going to help us reenact the memo in all its glory.
Need to find the script. All right, now we're ready to go.
But first, in order to understand why the Powell memo was so pivotal at the time it was written, and why it was so integral to the larger master plan, we need to get a better understanding of the man who wrote it. So here's the big question we had about Lewis Powell. How did this Southern gentleman, known as the friendliest guy in town, this genteel corporate lawyer whose core virtues were supposedly his pragmatism and moderation, how did this guy become the author of a stridently ideological manifesto and an early architect of the dystopia that we live in today? To answer that question, Jared went to visit the official Lewis F. Powell archives in the small historic town of Lexington, Virginia.
The buildings all have this kind of colonial style. It's a small campus here at Washington and Lee University, but very pretty. I can see why people would want to go to school here.
So this is where Powell went to college before going to Harvard Law School, right?
Yes, indeed. The Washington and Lee University School of Law. They have a whole wing named after him. I walked into the library and there's this huge painted portrait of him on the wall where he's sitting in his black robe. He's tall, thin, wire-rimmed glasses, and has a high, pointy hairline. I think he looks a little bit like Orville Redenbacher. Do you remember Orville Redenbacher?
Yeah. The popcorn guy, right?
Yeah, but more scholarly. To get into the archive, I took an elevator down to the basement. The archivist, Jennifer Mitchell, was so helpful and seemed excited to show me around. I don't think she gets a lot of visitors.
So it starts here and continues all the way up through box like 800 something.
Picture a large windowless room with rows and rows of accordion shelves, and on them are hundreds of numbered boxes.
The Powell papers are extensive. They cover his life from almost beginning to end. We have materials related.
Okay, so they get into a lot of his life stuff, and then they end up reading the memo. I think, it's 2:45 right now? I think I might have to get some other work done today. I don't know if I can do this for any longer, but this was awesome. And we're going to do this again. And and then next time, maybe we'll have a little panel up to talk about it. But give it some thought, and also please, nice, Amy. I would definitely check out the next few episodes as well, 4 through 6. Oh, awesome. Glad I could be a distraction. Awesome. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot in this stuff. So I would definitely check it out further. Thank you all for hanging for a while. And good. Do it. Go. Thank you, Sacred. Thank you. And to everyone, have a good day. Wakandan, you rock. Be Logical, you rock. Butterfly, Jenny, Wawa, Kale, Mike, Cam, Red Sand, thank you all. Have a great day, and let's do this again. All right, bye. Boom.
To his time here at Washington and Lee. We have materials from when he was a lawyer in private practice.
In World War II, Powell worked as an intelligence officer on the super secret Ultra Project. This is like high-level code breaking and spy stuff. And after the war, in addition to having a prosperous legal practice, he did a lot. Chair of the Richmond City School Board. He served on the Virginia State Board of Education, president of the American Bar Association, and he sat on several presidential commissions.
And he took notes, like when he had his initial phone calls and preparations for his confirmation hearings, he would, make notations, correspond with folks. All of that is saved.
Clearly, Lewis Powell was a meticulous record keeper, and he kept just about everything, which turned out great for us.
Yeah, the recording with Walter Cronkite, it was kind of an urban legend. So I was shocked when the vinyl record turned up in a box that no one had ever checked before. The archives had everything.
I mean, we have his uniform from World War II. I have 4 pairs of his socks in the collection.
But we weren't interested in Lewis Powell's socks. Lewis Powell was 64 when he got on the Supreme Court, one of the oldest nominees in history. He'd had an entire long career and was basically at retirement age by the time he wrote the memo. So, Jared, what did you find that tells us about his influences?
Well, while sifting through his boxes of old letters, correspondence, speeches, legal analysis, I was like, damn, this dude was industrious. This is him using a dictaphone in 1956.
What is in a position? This is a heading, initial caps underscored, question mark, paragraph.
For listeners who don't know what a dictaphone is, it was basically like a text-to-speech transcription app, except in this case, the app was an actual human secretary named Liz, who physically typed all his words directly onto paper.
The use of this name, correction, Liz, strike out the use of this name, put a comma.
His whole career, Powell was apparently relentless with the dictaphone. This was a man who was not just extremely smart and highly ambitious. He also had lots of ideas about how the world should work.
Okay, so where did these ideas come from?
There are 3 main facets to Powell that stood out for me. His professional formation at a particular kind of corporate law firm in Richmond, his deep fear of communism, and his work aiding the tobacco industry.
Okay, so Richmond, Virginia. Let's start there, where young Lewis grew up steeped in old Southern values and traditions. Oh man, I love the Dukes of Hazzard.
I think we need to go back a little further.
How's that? Better? Is that better?
Is that Deliverance?
Yeah, man.
That's a little too backwoods.
Okay, there we go. Richmond, Virginia was the capital of the Confederacy during the Civil War. After Reconstruction, it emerged as an economic hub in the early 1900s. The growth of the tobacco industry, banking, railroads, and manufacturing all converged to transform the city into a central power for the New South, this one based around corporate enterprise. Powell's family wasn't wealthy, but his father could trace his roots back to Captain Nathaniel Powell of the original Jamestown settlers. After college, Powell returned to Richmond and earned a job that would come to define his life and career.
No, man. Powell wasn't running moonshine in a muscle car with a Confederate flag painted on top. Powell was a good boy with legitimate career goals. He joined a law office in Richmond that represented big business trying to avoid government rules and regulations. The firm's founder had made a name for himself by helping railroad companies fight off regulators in Virginia. Rockefellers, railroad barons, that was their bread and butter.
Okay, so Lewis Powell, more boss hog than the Duke boys. Got it.
Correct. And as the firm's post-war clientele grew from small local companies into multinational conglomerates, Powell was one of the lawyers working hard to deregulate financial laws.
By the 1960s, Powell had become one of the most prominent lawyers in Richmond and a fixture of the city's elite establishment. Powell and his colleagues weren't just legal advisors. They were deeply involved in business strategy and decision-making, and they were often rewarded with shares in the companies they represented. Powell held seats on the boards of major companies like the Ethel Corporation, Brooks Brothers, various Virginia banks, and yes, Philip Morris.
That's right. And remember the vinyl record of Walter Cronkite celebrating Lewis Powell at that party? Well, they did a gag reenacting the moment that Powell joined the company.
However, his career reached a new high when Mr. Joseph F. Coleman said to him, "Congratulations, Lewis. You have just been elected to the board of directors of Philip Morris Incorporated."
Thank you very much. I shall always look back upon this moment.
And this brings us to the second major influence on Powell before he wrote his memo, the tobacco industry.
We will continue with our program after this important message from our sponsor.
Do you remember the Marlboro Man? Man, that guy's theme music was everywhere when we were kids.
Oh yeah, and he was on billboards and on television. This was actually a fake commercial that Philip Morris played during that Walter Cronkite show about Powell.
It started in Richmond, Virginia, and spread throughout the land. Till today, Marlboro country is everywhere. Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
In the mid-60s, Powell was one of the big defenders of Marlboro country. And when the Surgeon General began issuing reports that linked smoking to cancer and other health problems, Philip Morris saw itself as under attack. But Philip Morris and the tobacco industry didn't just sit back and accept regulations. They went on the offensive, creating alternative organizations and pushing their own scientific reports to support their arguments to the media and in the courts. Its CEO, Joseph Coleman, was actively defending their product on programs like Face the Nation.
And I concluded from that report that it's true that babies born from women who smoke are smaller, but they're just as healthy as the babies born from women who do not smoke.
What about the higher
And
rate
some
of
women would
deaths?
prefer having smaller babies.
Wait. Women would prefer underweight babies? Yeah, that didn't age well.
Oh, it didn't go over well at the time either. But Philip Morris didn't back down. In March 1970, Coleman and Philip Morris started using front groups to attack the American Cancer Society, which was spotlighting the link between tobacco and cancer.
This is like what's now known as astroturfing. Corporations funding fake citizens groups to muddle the debate and basically lie to the public.
Yeah, and when Powell was on Philip Morris's board, the company basically invented this strategy. It was all documented decades later when federal prosecutors charged Philip Morris and other large tobacco companies with racketeering, and later when states won huge class action lawsuits against the industry.
And so, where was Lewis Powell in all of this?
Well, he certainly wasn't just an observer watching from the boardroom. As legal counsel, he helped craft these programs, guiding specific lobbying efforts, communication strategies, and legal frameworks, all in an effort to protect profits and sow doubts about any adverse health claims. Let me read you this one letter from May 1970. Powell wrote to Coleman...
Wait a minute. Make it sound like you're talking into Lewis Powell's dictaphone.
As you know, I have long thought that the tobacco industry could not continue indefinitely to ignore the extremism and lack of regard for the truth manifested by the American Cancer Society and others. I believe your recent moves have been justified and constructive. At the very least, the American Cancer Society is likely to be more restrained in the future.
And to be clear, Powell is writing this to Philip Morris's CEO, even though he and the tobacco industry knew, based on their own studies, that cigarettes were killing people.
Yeah, and you have to understand, this campaign that Powell was involved in, this was a sophisticated PR effort that mixed lobbying, media relations, litigation, and industry groups to prevent anything that would hinder their profits.
And they were extremely successful. In 1971, Philip Morris saw record revenues. By the way, this was the same year they hosted the Walter Cronkite radio party for Lewis Powell. But while Powell was helping Philip Morris cover up tobacco's health risks, he also had a side obsession.
Which leads us to our third and final major influence on Powell, one that we were shocked to find. While digging around the Powell archives, I found letters showing that starting in the 1960s, Powell began a regular correspondence with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who infamously used the agency to target alleged communists in every aspect of American society. It turns out that while Powell was president of the American Bar Association and a member on the Virginia Board of Education, he was functioning as an SAC contact.
Okay, wait. What's an SAC contact?
It's an FBI term for confidential informant. Or you could say it was someone that the FBI was really close and friendly with. A trusted friend they could call upon to provide information, like in Powell's case, about possible communist activities in the legal profession.
Okay, so this fine, upstanding, polite guy, Lewis Powell, is also kind of like J. Edgar Hoover's eyes and ears on the legal profession.
Yeah, and not only that. Into the late 1960s, Powell was corresponding frequently with Hoover's most trusted lieutenant, sharing his concerns about communism and left-wing activism. This high-level FBI official was giving Powell agency intelligence about the operations and financials of the New Left. Powell was thinking a lot about this new breed of political activists and college campus organizers. He was very